escape. Gilthanas told him sharply to forget it. He would ruin everything. When pressed to elaborate, the elf fell silent, muttering only something about overwhelming odds. By sunrise of the third day, the Draconian army was flagging from the night's long march and looking forward to a rest. The companions had spent another sleepless night and looked forward to nothing but another chill and dismal day. But the cages suddenly rolled to a stop. Tanis glanced up, puzzled at the change in routine. The other prisoners roused themselves and looked out the cage bars. They saw an old man, dressed in long robes that once might have been white and a battered, pointed hat. He appeared to be talking to a tree.
I say, did you hear me?
The old man shook a worn walking stick at the oak.
I said move, and I mean it. I was sitting on that rock.
He pointed to a boulder.
Enjoying the rising sun on my old bones when you had the nerve to cast a shadow over it and chill me. Move this instant, I said.
The tree did not respond. It also did not move.
I won't take any more of your insolence.
The old man began to beat on the tree with his stick.
Move, or I'll... Someone shut that loony in a cage.
Viewmaster Turda shouted, galloping back from the front of the caravan.
Get your hands off me!
The old man shrieked at the Draconians, who ran up and accosted him. He beat on them feebly with his staff until they took it away from him.
Arrest the tree,
he insisted.
Obstructing sunlight. That's the charge.
The Draconians threw the old man roughly into the companion's cage. Tripping over his robes, he fell to the floor. Are you all right, old one? Riverwind asked as he assisted the old man to a seat. Gold Moon left Theros' side. Yes, old one, she said softly. Are you hurt? I am a cleric of
Mishikal,
he said, peering at the amulet around her neck.
How very interesting, my.
He stared at her in astonishment.
You don't look 300 years old.
Gold Moon blinked, uncertain how to react. How did you know? Did you recognize? I'm not 300. She was growing confused.
Oh, of course I'm not. I'm sorry, my dear.
The old man patted her hand.
Never bring up a lady's age in public. Forgive me. It won't happen again. Our little secret,
he said in a piercing whisper. Tas and Tika started to giggle. The old man looked around.
Kind of you to stop and offer me a lift. The road to Qualanost is long.
We're not going to Qualanost, Galthanas said sharply. We're prisoners, going to the slave mines of Paxtarchus.
Oh?
The old man glanced around them vaguely.
Is there another group due by here soon, then? I could have sworn this was the one.
What is your name, old one? Tika asked.
My name?
The old man hesitated, frowning.
Fizban? Yes, that's it. Fizban.
Fizban, Tasselhoff repeated as the cage lurched to a start again. That's not a name.
Isn't it?
The old man asked wistfully.
That's too bad. I was rather fond of it.
I think it's a splendid name, Tika said, glaring at Tas. The kender subsided into a corner, his eyes on the pouches slung over the old man's shoulders. Suddenly, Raistlin began to cough, and they all turned their attention to him. His coughing spasms had been growing worse and worse. He was exhausted and in obvious pain. His skin burned to the touch. Gold Moon was unable to help him. Whatever was burning the mage up inside, the cleric could not heal. Caraman knelt beside him, wiping away the bloody saliva that flecked his brother's lips.
He's got to have that stuff he drinks.
Caraman looked up in anguish.
I've never seen him this bad. If they won't listen to reason...
The big man scowled.
I'll break their heads. I don't care how many there are.
We'll talk to them when we stop for the night, Tanis promised, though he could guess the Viewmaster's answer.
Excuse me,
The old man said.
may I?
Fizban sat down beside Raceland. He laid his hand on the mage's head and sternly spoke a few words. Caraman, listening, closely heard
Stand
and Octai. Certainly it wasn't a healing prayer such as Gold Moon had tried, but the big man saw that his brother responded. The response was astonishing. Raceland's eyes fluttered and opened. He looked up at the old man with a wild expression of terror and grasped Fizban's wrist in his thin, frail hand. For an instant it seemed Raceland knew the old man. Then Fizban passed his hand over the mage's eyes. The look of terror subsided, replaced by confusion.
Hello?
Fizban beamed at him.
Name's, Fizban.
He shot a stern glance at Tasselhoff, daring the Kenda to laugh.
You are Magi.
Raceland whispered. His cough was gone.
Why, yes. I suppose I am. I am Magi.
Raceland said, struggling to sit up.
No kidding.
Fizban seemed immensely tickled.
Small world, Kryn. I'll have to teach you a few of my spells. I have one, a fireball. Let's see. How did that go?
The old man rambled on, long past the time the caravan stopped at the rising of the sun. Chapter 4. Rescued. Fizban's magic. Raceland suffered in body. Sturm suffered in mind. But perhaps the one who experienced the keenest suffering during the companion's 4-day imprisonment was Tasselhoff. The cruelest form of torture one can inflict on a Kender is to lock him up. Of course, it is also widely believed that the cruelest form of torture one can inflict on any other species is to lock them up with a Kender. After 3 days of Tasselhoff's incessant chatter, pranks, and practical jokes, the companions would have willingly traded the Kender for a peaceful hour of being stretched on the rack. At least that's what Flint said. Finally, after even Gold Moon lost her temper and nearly slapped him,
Hey,
Tanis
Bastion,
sent
how you doing,
Tasselhoff
bro?
to the back of the car. His legs
Since
hanging
you're
over
here,
him,
let's do a
the
dab.
Kender pressed his face against the iron bars and thought he would die of misery. He had never been so.
I hope you're doing good, Dabby. Bastion. I'm over here
Things
messing
got
shit up.
interesting with the discovery of Fizban. But the old man's amusement value wore thin when Tanis made cast returned the old magician's pouches. And so, driven to the point of desperation, Tasselhoff latched onto a new diversion. Seston. The
Okay,
Gully
it's still pretty cool.
The
Definitely gotta get hold of
generally
some
regarded
glove
Seston
box.
with amused pity. The Gully Dwarf was the object of Turda's.
Hell yeah, Bastion.
and
Oh, it's not going too bad.
He ran
Can't
the Viewmaster's
complain.
errands all night long.
I'm actually able to do
Turda at the front of the caravan,
a little bit
the
of gaming
hobgoblin
now.
captain at the rear,
I got helped out with
Viewmaster from
the
supply
funds for a controller.
feeding and watering the Viewmaster's pony, and any other nasty jobs the Viewmaster could devise. Turda knocked him flat at least 3 times a day. The Draconians tormented him, and the hobgoblins stole his food. Even the elk kicked at him whenever he trotted past. The Gully Dwarf bore it all with such a grimly defiant spirit.
How's your
it won
day
him the
going?
sympathy of the companions.
How was your day, Bastion?
Seston began to stay near the companions when not busy. Tanis, eager for information about Pax Tharkas, asked him about his homeland and how he came to work for the Viewmaster. The story took over a day for Seston to relate, and another day for the companions to piece together, since he started in the middle and plunged headlong into the beginning. What it amounted to eventually wasn't much help. Seston was among a large group of gully dwarves living in the hills around Pax Tharkas, when Lord Verminard and his Draconians captured the iron mines, which he needed to make steel weapons for his crew. Big fire. All day, all night. Bad smell. Seston wrinkled his nose. Panel rock. All day, all night. I get good job in kitchen. His face brightened a moment. Fix hot soup. Very hot. His face fell. Spilled soup. Hot soup. Heat up armor real fast. Lord Verminard.
Hell yeah, Bastien. That's badass.
He sighed. I go with you, master. Me volunteer. Maybe we can shut the mines down, Caraman suggested. That's a thought, Tanis mused. How many Draconians does Lord Verminard have guarding the mines? 2, Seston said, holding up a tent.
Trout's always good eating.
Tanis sighed, remembering where they had heard that before.
Make sure it's at the right temp.
Seston looked at him hopefully. There'd be only 2 dragons, too. 2 dragons, Tanis said incredulously. Not more than 2. Caraman groaned and settled back. The warrior had been giving dragon fighting serious exact sorrow. He and Stern had reviewed every tale about the only known thing the knight could remember. Unfortunately, no one had ever taken the legends of Huma seriously before, except the Solamnic Knights, for which they were ridiculed. So much of Huma's tale had been distorted by time or forgotten. A knight of truth and power, who called down the gods themselves and forged the mighty Dragonlance. Caraman murmured now.
Now it's on self-clean
who
mode.
lay asleep on the straw-covered floor of their prison. Dragonlance, muttered Fizban, waking with a snort. Who said anything about the Dragonlance? My brother, Raceland whispered, smiling bitter, quoting the cat.
Did you keep the trout or did you toss it back?
Children's stories that have come to haunt
Give me 1 second. I'll be right back.
story. Humor and the Dragonlance, said the old man, stroking his beard. Story. That's all it is. Caraman yawned and scratched his chest. Who knows if it's real, or if the Dragonlance was real, or even if Huma was real. We know the dragons are real. Raceland murmured. Huma was real. Fizban said softly. And so was the Dragonlance. The old man's face grew sad. Was it? Caraman sat up. Can you describe it? Of course. Fizban sniffed disdainfully. Everyone was listening now. Fizban was, in fact, a bit disconcerted by his audience for his stories. It was a weapon similar to... No, it wasn't. Actually, it was... No, it wasn't that either. It was closer to... almost a... Rather, it was sort of a... lance. That's it. A lance. He nodded earnestly. It was quite good against dragons. And Caraman grumbled. Tanis smiled and shook his head.
Catch and release.
Sitting
That's
back
it.
against the bars, he wearily closed his eyes.
And I gotta
Soon
take
everyone except Raceland and
this
Tackleton
out.
fell into a fitful sleep. The Kender,
Well,
wide awake and bored,
so that's pretty much what I load up.
hopeful.
The ceramic.
Sometimes, if Raceland was in a good mood, he would tell stories about magic users of old. But the mage, wrapped in his red robes, was staring curiously at Fizban. The old man sat on a bench, snoring gently, his head bobbing up and down as the cart jounced over the road. Raceland's golden eyes narrowed to gleaming slits, as though he had been struck by a new and disturbing thought. After a moment, he pulled his hood up over his head and leaned back. his face lost in the shadows. Tasselhoff sighed. Then, glancing around, he saw Seston walking near the cage. The Kender brightened. Here, he knew, was an appreciative audience for his stories. Tasselhoff, calling him over, began to relate one of his own personal favorites. The two moons sank. The prisoners slept. The hobgoblins trailed along behind, half asleep, talking about making camp soon. Viewmaster Turda rode up ahead, dreaming about promotion. Behind the Viewmaster, the Draconians muttered among themselves in their harsh language, casting baleful glances at Turda when he wasn't looking. Tasselhoff sat, swinging his legs over the side of the cage, talking to Seston. The Kender noticed, without seeming to, that Gilfanas was only pretending to sleep. Tas saw the elf's eyes open and glance quickly around when he thought no one was watching. This intrigued Tas immensely. It seemed almost as if Gilfanas were watching or waiting for something. The Kender lost the thread of his story. And so I, grabbed a rock from my pouch, threw it, and thunk, hit the wizard right on the head. Tas finished hurriedly. The demon grabbed the wizard by the foot and dragged him down into the depths of the abyss. The first demon thank ye, prompted Seston, who had heard this story, with variations, twice before. You forgot. Did I? Tas asked, keeping an eye on Gilfanas. Well, yes, the demon thanked me and took away the magic ring he'd given me. If it wasn't dark, you could see the outline the ring burned on my finger. Sun upping. Morning soon, I see them, the gully dwarf said eagerly. It was still dark, but a faint light in the east hinted that soon the sun would be rising on the fourth day of their journey. Suddenly, Tas heard a bird call in the woods. Several answered.
What are you smoking on tonight,
Bird, Tas thought. Never heard their like before, but that he'd never been this far south before. He knew where they were from one of his many nights. They had passed over the only bridge across the White Rage River and were heading south toward Paxthon's, which was marked on the Kender's map as the site of the famed Darken Iron Mines. The land began to rise, and thick forests of aspens appeared to the west. The Draconians and hobgoblins kept eyeing the forest, and their pace picked up. Concealed within these woods was Qualanasti, the ancient elven home. Another bird called, much nearer now. Then the hair rose on Tasselhoff's neck, as the same bird call sounded from right behind him. The Kender turned to see Gilfanas on his feet, his fingers to his lips, an eerie whistle splitting the air. Tanis! Tas yelled. But the half-elf was already awake. So was everyone in the car. Fizban sat up, yawned, and glanced around. Oh, good, he said mildly. The elves are here. What elves? Where? Tanis sat up. There was a sudden whirring sound like a covey of quail taking flight. A cry rang out from the supply wagon in front of them. Then there was a splintering sound as the wagon, now driverless, lurched into a rut and tipped over. The driver of their cage wagon pulled sharply on the reins, stopping the elves before they ran into the wrecked supply wagon. The cage tipped precariously, sending the prisoners sprawling. The driver got the elk going again and guided them around the wreckage. Suddenly, the driver of the cage screamed and clutched at his neck, where the companions saw the feathered shaft of an arrow silhouetted against the dimly lit morning stars. The driver's body tumbled from the seat. The other guard stood up, sword raised. Then he too toppled forward with an arrow in his chest. The elk, feeling the reins go slack, slowed until the cage rolled to a halt. Cries and screams echoed up and down the caravan as arrows whizzed through the air. The companions fell for cover face first on the floor of the cage. What is it? What's going on? Tanis asked Gilthanas. But the elf, ignoring him, peered through the dawn gloom into the forest. Oh, the elves, he called. Tanis, what's happening? Sturm sat up, speaking his first words in 4 days. Orthiers is Gilthanas's brother. I take it this is a rescue, Tanis said. An arrow zipped past and lodged in the wooden side of the cart, narrowly missing the knight. It won't be much of a rescue if we end up dead. Sturm dropped to the floor. I thought elves were expert marksmen. Keep low, Gilthanas ordered. The arrows are only to cover our escape. This is a strike-and-run raid. My people are not capable of attacking a large body directly. We must be ready to run for the woods. And how do we get out of these cages? Sturm demanded. We cannot do everything for you, Gilthanas replied coldly. There are magic users. I cannot work without my spell components. Raistlin hissed from beneath a bench. Keep down, old one, he said to Fizban, who, head raised, was looking around with interest. Perhaps I can help, the old magician said, his eyes brightening. Now, let me think. What in the name of the abyss is going on? Roared a voice out of the darkness. Viewmaster Turda appeared, galloping on his pony. Why have we stopped? We under attack, Seston cried, crawling out from under the cage where he'd taken cover. Attack! Blitzschock! Get this cart moving! Turda shouted. An arrow thunked into the Viewmaster's saddle. Turda's red eyes flew open, and he stared fearfully in the woods. We're under attack. Elves trying to free the prisoners! Driver and guard dead, Seston shouted, flattening himself against the cage as another arrow just missed him. What me do? The arrow zipped over Turda's head. Ducking, he had to clutch his pony's neck to keep himself from falling off. I'll get another driver, he said hastily. You stay here. Guard these prisoners with your life. I'll hold you responsible if they escape. The Viewmaster stuck his spurs into his pony, and the fear-crazed animal leaped forward. My God! Hobgoblins! To me! The Viewmaster yelled as he galloped to the rear of the line. His shouts echoed back. Hundreds of elves! We're surrounded! Charge to the north! I must report this to Lord Verminard! Turda reined in at the sight of a Draconian captain. You Draconians, tend to the prisoners! He spurred his horse on, still shouting, and 100 hobgoblins charged after their valiant leader, away from the battle. Soon, they were completely out of sight. Well, that takes care of the hobgoblins, Sturm said, his face relaxing in a smile. Now all we have left to worry about is 50 or so Draconians. I don't suppose, by the way, that there are hundreds of elves out there. Gilthanas shook his head. More likely 20. Tika, lying flat on the floor, cautiously raised her head and looked south. In the pale morning light, she could see the hulking forms of the Draconians about a mile ahead, leaping into the cover on either side of the road as the elven archers moved down to fire into their ranks. She touched Tanis's arm, pointing. We've got to get out of this cage, Tanis said, looking back. The Draconians won't bother taking us to Pax Tharkas now that the Viewmaster's gone. They'll just butcher us in these cages. Caraman, I'll try, the fighter rumbled. He stood and gripped the bars of the cage in his huge hands. Closing his eyes, he took a deep breath and tried to force the bars apart. His face reddened. The muscles in his arms bunched. The knuckles on his big hands turned white. It was useless. Gasping for breath, Caraman flattened himself on the floor. Seston, Tasselhoff cried. Your axe! Break the lock! The gully dwarf's eyes opened wide. He stared at the companions. Then he glanced down the trail the Viewmaster had taken. His face twisted in an agony of indecision. Seston, Tasselhoff began. An arrow zinged past the kender. The Draconians behind them were moving forward, firing into the cages. Tas flattened himself on the floor. "Seston," he began again, "help free us and you can come with us." A look of firm resolve hardened Seston's features. He reached for his axe, which he wore strapped onto his back. The companions watched in nail-biting frustration as Seston felt all around his shoulders for the axe, which was located squarely in the middle of his back. Finally, one hand discovered the handle, and he pulled the axe out. The blade glinted in the gray light of dawn. Flint saw it and groaned.
"That axe is older than I am. It must date back to the Cataclysm. He probably couldn't cut through a Kender's brain, let alone that lock."
"Hush," Tanis instructed, although his own hopes sank at the sight of the Gully Dwarf's weapon. It wasn't even a battle axe, just a small, battered, rusty woodcutting axe the Gully Dwarf had apparently picked up somewhere, thinking it was a weapon. Seston tucked the axe between his knees and spread on his hands. Arrows thumped and clattered around the bars of the cage. One struck Karaman's shield. Another pinned Tika's blouse to the side of the cage, grazing her arm. Tika couldn't remember being more terrified in her life, not even the night dragons struck salts. She wanted to scream. She wanted Karaman to put his arm around her, but Karaman didn't dare move. Tika caught sight of Gold Moon, shielding the injured Theros with her body, her face pale but calm. Tika pressed her lips together and drew a deep breath. Grimly, she yanked the arrow out of the wood and tossed it to the floor, ignoring the stinging pain in her arm. Looking south, she saw that the Draconians, momentarily confused by the sudden attack and the disappearance of Turda, were organized now, on their feet and running toward the cages. Their arrows filled the air. Their chest armor gleamed in the dim gray light of morning. So did the bright steel of their longswords, which they carried clamped in their jaws as they ran. "Draconians closing in," she reported to Tanis, trying to keep her voice from shaking. "Hurry, Seston!" Tanis shouted. The Gully Dwarf gripped the axe, swung it with all his might, and missed the lock, striking the iron bars a blow that nearly jarred the axe from his hands. Shrugging apologetically, he swung again. This time he struck the lock. He didn't even dent it, Sturm reported. "Tanis?" Tika quavered, pointing. Several Draconians were within 10 feet of them, pinned down for a few moments by the elven archers, but all hope of rescue seemed lost. Seston struck the lock again. "He chipped it," Sturm said in exasperation. "At this rate, we'll be out in about 3 days. What are those elves doing anyway? Why don't they quit skulking about and attack?" "We don't have enough men to attack a force this size." Gilthanas returned angrily, crouching next to the knight. "They'll get to us when they can. We are at the front of the line. See, others are escaping." The elf pointed to the 2 wagons behind them. The elves had broken the locks, and the prisoners were dashing madly for the woods as the elves covered them, darting out from the trees to let fly their deadly barrage of arrows. But once the prisoners were safe, the elves retreated into the trees. The Draconians had no intention of going into the elven woods after them. Their eyes were on the last prison cage and the wagon containing the prisoners' possessions. The companions could hear the shouts of the Draconian captains. The meaning was clear. "Kill the prisoners! Divide the spoils!" Everyone could see that the Draconians would reach them long before the elves did. Tanis swore in frustration. Everything seemed futile. He felt a stirring at his side. The old magician, Fizban, was getting to his feet. "No, old one." Raceland grasped at Fizban's robes. "Keep under cover." An arrow zipped through the air and stuck in the old man's bent and battered hat. Fizban, muttering to himself, did not seem to notice. He presented a wonderful target in the grey light. Draconian arrows flew around him like wasps, and seemed to have as little effect, although he did appear mildly annoyed. When one stuck into a pouch, he happened to have his hand in at the moment.
Get down,
Caraman roared.
you're drawing the fire.
Fizban did kneel down for a moment, but it was only to talk to Raistlin.
Say there, my boy.
He said as an arrow flew past, right where he'd been standing.
Have you got a bit of back guano on you? I'm out. No, old one.
Raistlin whispered frantically.
Get down. Oh, it is. Well, I guess I'll have to wing it.
The old magician stood up, planted his feet firmly on the floor, and rolled up the sleeves of his robe. He shut his eyes, pointing at the cage door, and began to mumble strange words. What spell is he casting? Tanis asked Raistlin. Can you understand? The young mage listened intently, his brow furrowed. Suddenly, Raistlin's eyes opened wide.
No!
He shrieked, trying to pull on the old magician's robe to break his concentration, but it was too late. Fizban said the final word and pointed his finger at the lock on the back door of the cage.
Take cover!
Raistlin threw himself beneath a bench. Seston, seeing the old magician point at the cage door, and at him on the other side of it, fell flat on his face. 3 Draconians, reaching the cage door, their weapons dripping with their saliva, skidded to a halt, staring up in alarm.
What is it?
Tanis yelled.
Fireball!
Raistlin gasped, and at that moment a gigantic ball of yellow-orange fire shot from the old magician's fingertips and struck the cage door with an explosive boom. Tanis buried his face in his hands as flames billowed and crackled around him. A wave of heat washed over him, searing his lungs. He heard the Draconian scream in pain and smelled burning reptile flesh. Then smoke flew down his throat.
The floor's on fire!
Caraman yelled. Tanis opened his eyes and staggered to his feet. He expected to see the old magician, nothing but a mound of black ash like the bodies of the Draconians lying behind the wagon. But Fizban stood staring at the iron door, stroking his singed beard in dismay. The door was still shut.
That really should have worked,
he said.
What about the lock?
Tanis yelled, trying to see through the smoke. The iron bars of the cell door already glowed red hot.
It didn't budge,
Sturm shouted. He tried to approach the cage door to kick it open, but the heat radiating from the bars made it impossible.
The lock may be hot enough to break.
He choked in the smoke. Seston! Tasselhoff's shrill voice rose above the crackling flames. Try again! Hurry! The gully dwarf staggered to his feet, swung the axe, missed, swung again, and hit the lock. The superheated metal shattered. The lock gave way, and the cage door swung open. Tanis, help us! Goldmoon cried as she and Riverwind struggled to pull the injured Theros from his smoking power. Sturm, the others! Tanis yelled, then coughed in the smoke. He staggered to the front of the wagon as the rest jumped up, Sturm grabbing hold of Fizban, who was still staring sadly at the door. Come on, old one, he yelled, his gentle actions belying his harsh words as he took Fizban's arm. Caraman, Raistlin, and Tika caught Fizban as he jumped from the flaming wreckage. Tanis and Riverwind lifted Theros by the shoulders and dragged him out. Goldmoon stumbled after them. She and Sturm jumped from the cart just as the ceiling collapsed. Caraman, get our weapons from the supply wagon, Tanis shouted. Go with him, Sturm. Flint and Tasselhoff, get the packs. Raistlin, I will get my back, the mage said.
choking in the smoke. And my staff. No one else may touch them. All right, Tannis said, thinking quickly. Gilthanas, I'm not yours to order around, Tannis. The elf snapped and ran off into the woods without looking back. Before Tannis could answer, Sturm and Caraman ran back. Caraman's knuckles were split and bleeding. There had been 2 Draconians looting the supply wagon. Get moving, Sturm shouted. More coming. Where's your elf friend? He asked Tannis suspiciously. He's gone ahead into the woods, Tannis said. Just remember, he and his people saved us. Did they? Sturm said, his eyes narrowed. It seems that between the elves and the old man, we came closer to getting killed than with just about anything short of the dragon. At that moment, 6 Draconians rushed out from the smoke, skidding to a halt at the sight of the warriors. Run for the woods, Tannis yelled, bending down to help Riverwind lift Theros. They carried the smith to cover, while Caraman and Sturm stood side by side, covering their retreat. Both noticed immediately that the creatures they faced were unlike the Draconians they had fought before. Their armor and coloring were different, and they carried bows and long swords, the latter dripping with some sort of awful ichor. Both men remembered stories about Draconians that turned to acid, and those whose bones exploded. Caraman charged forward, bellowing like an enraged animal, his sword slashing in an arc. 2 Draconians fell before they knew what was attacking. Sturm saluted the other 4 with his sword and swept off the head of one in the return stroke. He jumped at the others, but they stopped just out of his range, grinning, apparently waiting for something. Sturm and Caraman watched uneasily, wondering what was going on. Then they knew. The bodies of the slain Draconians near them began to melt into the road. The flesh boiled and ran like lard in a skillet. A yellowish vapor formed over them, mixing with the thinning smoke from the smoldering cage. Both men gagged as the yellow vapor rose around them. They grew dizzy and knew they were being poisoned. Come on, get back, Tannis yelled from the woods. The 2 stumbled back, fleeing through a rainstorm of arrows, as a force of 40 or 50 Draconians swept around the cage, screeching in anger. The Draconians started after them, then fell back when a clear voice called out, "Aye, Ulsain!" And 10 elves, led by Gilthanas, ran from the woods. "Quintalas Uvenelai!" Gilthanas shouted. Caraman and Sturm staggered past him, the elves covering their retreat. Then the elves fell back. "Follow me," Gilthanas told the companions, switching to High Common. At a sign from Gilthanas, 4 of the elven warriors picked up Theros and carried him into the woods. Tannis looked back at the cage. The Draconians had come to a halt, eyeing the woods warily. "Hurry!" Gilthanas urged. "My men will cover you." Elven voices rose out of the woods, taunting the approaching Draconians, trying to lure them into arrow range. The companions looked at each other hesitantly. "I do not want to enter Elvenwood," Riverwind said harshly. "It is all right," Tannis said, putting his hand on Riverwind's arm. "You have my pledge." Riverwind stared at him for a moment, then plunged into the woods, the others walking by his side. Last to come were Caraman and Raceland, helping Fizban. The old man glanced back at the cage, now nothing more than a pile of ashes and twisted iron. "Wonderful spell. And did anyone say a word of thanks?"
he asked wistfully. The elves led them swiftly through the wilderness. Without their guidance, the party would have been hopelessly lost. Behind them, the sound of battle turned half-hearted.
The Draconians know better than to follow us into the woods,
Gilthanas said, smiling grimly. Tanis, seeing armed elven warriors hidden among the leaves of the trees, had little fear of pursuit. Soon, all sounds of fighting were lost. A thick carpeting of dead leaves covered the ground. Bare tree limbs creaked in the chill wind of early morning. After spending days riding cramped in the cage, the companions moved slowly and stiffly, glad for the exercise that warmed their blood. Gilthanas led them into a wide glade as the morning sun lit the woods with a pale light. The glade was crowded with freed prisoners. Tasselhoff glanced eagerly around the group, then shook his head sadly. "I wonder what happened to Seston," he said to Tanis. "I thought I saw him run off." "Don't worry." The half-elf patted him on the shoulder. "He'll be all right. The elves have no love for gully dwarves, but they wouldn't kill him." Tasselhoff shook his head. It wasn't the elves he was worried about. Entering the clearing, the companions saw an unusually tall and powerfully built elf speaking to the group of refugees. His voice was cold, his demeanor serious and stern. "You are free to go, if any are free to go in this land. We have heard rumors that the lands south of Pax Tharkus are not under the control of the Dragon High Lord. I suggest, therefore, that you head southeast. Move as far and as fast as you can this day. We have food and supplies for your journey, all that we can spare. We can do little else for you." The refugees from Solace, stunned by their sudden freedom, stared around bleakly and helplessly. They had been farmers on the outskirts of Solace, forced to watch while their homes burned and their crops were stolen to feed the Dragon High Lord's army. Most of them had never been farther from Solace than Haven. Dragons and elves were creatures of legend. Now children's stories had come to haunt them. Goldmoon's clear blue eyes glinted. She knew how they felt. "How can you be so cruel?" she called out angrily to the tall elf. "Look at these people. They have never been out of Solace in their lives, and you tell them calmly to walk through a land overrun by enemy forces." "What would you have me do, human?" The elf interrupted her. "Lead them south myself? It is enough that we have freed them. My people have their own problems. I cannot be concerned with those of humans." He shifted his eyes to the group of refugees. "I warn you, time is wasting. Be on your way." Goldmoon turned to Tanis, seeking support. But he just shook his head, his face dark and shadowy. One of the men, giving the elves a haggard glance, stumbled off the trail that meandered south through the wilderness. The other men shouldered crude weapons. Women caught up their children, and families straggled off. Goldmoon strode forward to confront the elf. "How can you care so little for humans?" The elf stared at her coldly. "It was humans who brought the cataclysm upon us. They were the ones who sought the gods, demanding in their pride the power that was granted humor in humility. It was humans who caused the gods to turn their faces from us. They haven't," Goldmoon shouted. "The gods are among us." Porthios's eyes flared with anger. He started to turn away when Gilthanas stepped up to his brother and spoke to him swiftly in the elven language. "What do they say?" Riverwind asked Tanis suspiciously. "Gilthanas is telling how Goldmoon healed Theros," Tanis said slowly. It had been many, many years since he had heard or spoken more than a few words in the elven tongue. He had forgotten how beautiful the language was. So beautiful, it seemed to cut his soul and leave him wounded and bleeding inside. He watched Porthos's eyes widen in disbelief. Then Gilphanas pointed at Tanis. Both the brothers turned to face him, their expressive elven features hardening. Riverwind flicked a glance at Tanis, saw the half-elf standing pale but composed under his scrutiny. You return to the land of your birth, do you not? Riverwind asked. It does not seem you are welcome. Yes, Tanis said grimly, aware of what the plainsman was thinking. He knew Riverwind was not prying into personal affairs out of curiosity. In many ways, they were in more danger now than they had been with the Viewmaster. They will take us to Qualinost, Tanis said slowly, the words apparently causing him deep pain. I have not been there for many years. As Flint will tell you, I was not forced out, but few were sorry to see me leave. As you once said to me, Riverwind, to humans I am half elven. To elves, I was half man. Then let us leave and travel south with the others. Riverwind said. You would never get out of here alive, Flint murmured. Tanis nodded. Look around, he said. Riverwind glanced around him and saw the elven warriors, moving like shadows among the trees, their brown clothing blended in with the wilderness that was their home. As the two elves ended their conversation, Porthos turned his gaze from Tanis back to Gold Moon. I have heard strange tales from my brother that bear investigation. I extend to you, therefore, what the elves have extended to no humans in years. Our hospitality. You will be our honored guests. Please follow me. Porthos gestured. Nearly 24 elven warriors emerged from the woods, surrounding their companions. Honored prisoners is more like it. This is going to be rough on you, my lad, Flint said to Tanis in a low, gentle voice. I know, old friend. Tanis rested his hand on the dwarf's shoulder. I know. Chapter 5. The Speaker of the Sun. I have never imagined such beauty existed, Gold Moon said softly. The day's march had been difficult, but the reward at the end was beyond their dreams. The companions stood on a high cliff over the fabled city of Qualinost. 4 slender spires rose from the city's corners like glistening spindles, their brilliant white stone marbled with shining silver. Graceful arches, swooping from spire to spire, soared through the air. Crafted by ancient dwarven metalsmiths, they were strong enough to hold the weight of an army, yet they appeared so delicate that a bird lighting on them might overthrow the balance. These glistening arches were the city's only boundaries. There was no wall around Qualinost. The elven city opened its arms lovingly to the wilderness. The buildings of Qualinost enhanced nature rather than concealing it. The houses and shops were carved from rose-colored quartz. Tall and slender as aspen trees, they vaulted upward in impossible spirals from quartz-lined avenues. In the center stood a great tower of burnished gold, catching the sunlight and throwing it back in whirling, sparkling patterns that gave the tower life. Looking down upon the city, it seemed that peace and beauty, unchanged from ages past, must dwell in Qualinost, if it dwelled anywhere in Kryn. Rest here, Gilphanas told them, leaving them in a grove of aspen trees. The journey has been long, and for that I apologize. I know you are weary and your hunger. Caraman looked up hopefully. But I must beg your indulgence a few moments longer. Please excuse me. Gilfanas bowed, then walked to stand by his brother. Sighing, Caraman began rummaging through his pack for the 5th time, hoping perhaps he had overlooked a morsel. Raistlin read his spellbook, his lips repeating the difficult words, trying to grasp their meaning, to find the correct inflection and phrasing that would make his blood burn, and so tell him the spell was his at last. The others looked around, marveling at the beauty of the city beneath them, and the aura of ancient tranquility that lay over it. Even Riverwind seemed touched. His face softened, and he held Goldmoon close. For a brief instant, their caress and their sorrows eased, and they found comfort in each other's nearness. Tika sat apart, watching them wistfully. Tasselhoff was trying to map their way from Gateway into Qualinost, although Tanis had told him 4 times that the way was secret, and the elves would never permit him to carry off a map. The old magician, Fizban, was asleep. Sturm and Flint watched Tanis in concern. Flint, because he alone had any idea of what the half-elf was suffering. Sturm, because he knew what it was like returning to a home that didn't want you. The knight laid his hand on Tanis's arm. Coming home isn't easy, my friend. Is it? He asked. No, Tanis answered softly. I thought I had left this behind long ago. But now, I know I never truly left at all. Volanesti is part of me, no matter how much I want to deny it. Hush, Gilfanas, Flint warned. The elf came over to Tanis. Runners were sent ahead, and now they have returned, he said in Elven. My father has asked to see you, all of you, at once, in the Tower of the Sun. I cannot permit time for refreshment. In this we seem crude and impolite. Gilfanas, Tanis interrupted in common. My friends and I have been through unimagined peril. We have traveled roads where, literally, the dead walked. We won't faint from hunger. He glanced at Karen. Some of us weren't, at any rate. The warrior, hearing Tanis, sighed and tightened his belt. Thank you, Gilfanas said stiffly. I am glad you understand. Now, please follow as swiftly as you can. The companions gathered their things hastily and woke Fizban. Rising to his feet, he fell over a tree root. Big lummox, he snapped, striking it with his staff.
There! Did you see it? Tried to trip me,
he said to Raistlin. The mage slipped his precious book back into its pouch. Yes, old one. Raistlin smiled, assisting Fizban to his feet. The old magician leaned on the young one's shoulder as they walked after the others. Tanis watched them, wondering. The old magician was obviously a dotard. Yet Tanis remembered Raistlin's look of stark terror when he woke and found Fizban leaning over him. What had the mage seen? What did he know about this old man? Tanis reminded himself to ask. Now, however, he had other, more pressing matters on his mind. Walking forward, he caught up with the elf. Tell me, Gilfanas, Tanis said in Elven, the unfamiliar words haltingly coming back to him. What's going on? I have a right to know. Have you? Gilfanas asked harshly, glancing at Tanis from the corners of his almond-shaped eyes. Do you care what happens to elves anymore? You can barely speak our language. Of course I care, Tanis said angrily. You are my people too. Then why do you flaunt your human heritage? Gilthanas gestured to Tanis's bearded face. I would think you would be ashamed. He stopped, biting his lip, his face flushing. Tanis nodded grimly. Yes, I was ashamed, and that's why I left. But if I was ashamed, who made me so? Forgive me, Tantanas, Gilthanas said, shaking his head. What I said was cruel, and truly I did not mean it. It's just that if you only understood the danger we face. Tell me, Tanis practically shouted in his frustration. I want to understand. We are leaving Qualinasti, Gilthanas said. Tanis stopped and stared at the elf. Leaving Qualinasti? He repeated, switching to common in his shop. The companions heard him and cast quick glances at each other. The old magician's face darkened as he tugged at his beard. You can't mean it, Tanis said softly. Leaving Qualinasti? Why? Surely things aren't this bad. They are worse, Gilthanas said sadly. Look around you, Tantanas. You see Qualinost in its final days. They entered the first streets of the city. Tanis, at first glance, saw everything exactly as he had left it 50 years ago. Neither the streets of crushed, gleaming rock, nor the aspen trees they ran among had changed. The clean streets sparkled brightly in the sunshine. The aspens had grown perhaps not. Their leaves glimmered in the late morning light. The gold and silver inlaid branches rustled and sang. The houses along the streets had not changed, decorated with quartz. They shimmered in the sunlight, creating small rainbows of color everywhere the eye looked. All seemed as the elves loved it, beautiful, orderly, unchanging. No, that was wrong, Tanis realized. The song of the trees was now sad and lamenting, not the peaceful, joyful song Tanis remembered. Qualinost had changed, and the change was change itself. He tried to grasp hold of it, to understand it, even as he felt his soul shrivel with loss. The change was not in the buildings, not in the trees, or the sun shining through the leaves. The change was in the air. It crackled with tension, as before a storm. And as Tanis walked the streets of Qualinost, he saw things he had never before seen in his homeland. He saw haste. He saw hurry. He saw indecision. He saw panic, desperation, and despair. Women meeting friends, embraced and wept, then parted, and hurried on separate ways. Children sat forlorn, not understanding, knowing only that play was out of place. Men gathered in groups, hands on their swords, keeping watchful eyes on their families. Here and there fires burned as the elves destroyed what they loved and could not carry with them, rather than let the coming darkness consume it. Tanis had grieved over the destruction of Solace, but the sight of what was happening in Qualinost entered his soul like the blade of a dull knife. He had not realized it meant so much to him. He had known, deep in his heart, that even if he never returned, Qualinasti would always be there. But no, he was losing even that. Qualinasti would perish. Tanis heard a strange sound and turned around to see the old magician weeping. What plans have you made? Where will you go? Can you escape? Tanis asked Gilthanas bleakly. You will
find out the answers to those questions and more. Too soon. Too soon.
Give me 1 second, everyone. Be right back.
Murmured.
The Tower of the Sun rose high above the other buildings in Quarry North. Sunlight reflecting off the golden surface gave the illusion of whirling movement. The companions entered the tower in silence, awestruck by the beauty and majesty of the ancient building. Only Raceland glanced around, unimpressed. To his eyes there existed no beauty, only death. Gilfanas led the companions to a small alcove. "This room is just off the main chamber," he said. "My father is meeting with the heads of household to plan the evacuation. My brother has gone to tell him of our arrival. When the business is finished, we will be summoned." At his gesture, the elves entered, bearing pitchers and basins of cool water. "Please refresh yourselves as time permits." The companions drank, then washed the dust of the journey from their faces and hands. Sturm removed his cloak and carefully polished his armor as best he could with one of Tasselhoff's handkerchiefs. Gold Moon brushed out her shining hair, kept her cloak fastened around her neck. She and Tanis had decided the medallion she wore should remain hidden until the time seemed proper to reveal it. Some would recognize it. Fizban tried, without much success, to straighten his bent and shapeless hat. Karaman looked around for something to eat. Gilfanas stood apart from them all, his face pale and drawn. Within moments, Portheos appeared in the arched doorway. "You are cold," he said sternly. The companions entered the chamber of the Speaker of the Suns. No human had seen the inside of this building for hundreds of years. No Kender had ever seen it. The last dwarves who saw it were the ones present at its construction hundreds of years before.
"Ah. Now this is craftsmanship,"
Flint said softly, tears misting his eyes. The chamber was round and seemed immensely larger than the slender tower could possibly encompass. Built entirely of white marble, there were no support beams, no columns. The room soared upwards hundreds of feet to form a dome at the very top of the tower, where a beautiful mosaic made of inlaid, glittering tile portrayed the blue sky and the sun on one half, the silver moon, the red moon, and the stars on the other half. The halves separated by a rainbow. There were no lights in the chamber. Cunningly built windows and mirrors focused sunlight into the room, no matter where the sun was located in the sky. The streams of sunlight converged in the center of the chamber, illuminating a rostrum. There were no seats in the tower. The elves stood, men and women together. Only those designated as heads of household had the right to be in this meeting. There were more women present than Tanis ever remembered seeing, many dressed in deep purple, the color of mourning. Elves marry for life, and if the spouse dies, do not remarry. Thus, the widow has the status of head of household until her death. The companions were led to the front of the chamber. The elves made room for them in respectful silence, but gave them strange, forbidding looks. Particularly the dwarf, the Kender, and the two barbarians who seemed grotesque in their outlandish furs. There were astonished murmurs at the sight of the proud and noble knight of Salam, and there were scattered mutterings over the appearance of Raceland in his red robes. Elven magic users wore the white robes of good, not the red robes, proclaiming neutrality. That, the elves believed, was just one step removed from black. As the crowd settled down, the Speaker of the Suns came forward to the rostrum. It had been many years since Tanis had seen the speaker, his adopted father, and here too he saw change. The man was still taller even than his son Portheos. He was dressed in the yellow, shimmering robes of his office. His face was stern and unyielding, his manner austere. He was the Speaker of the Suns, called the Speaker. He had been called the Speaker for well over a century. Those who knew his name never pronounced it, including his children. But Tanis saw in his hair touches of silver, which had not been there before, and there were lines of care and sorrow in the face, which had previously seemed untouched by time. Portheos joined his brother as the companions, led by the elves, and the speaker extended his arms and called them by name. They walked forward into their father's embrace. "My son," the speaker said brokenly. And Tanis was startled at this show of emotion. "I never thought to see either of you in this life again. Tell me of the raid," he said, turning to Gilgamesh. "In time, speaker," said Gilgamesh. "First I bid you greet our guests." "Yes, I'm sorry." The speaker passed a trembling hand over his face, and it seemed to Tanis that he aged even as he stood before him. "Forgive me, guest. I bid you welcome. You who have entered this kingdom, no one has entered for many years." Gilgamesh spoke a few words, and the speaker stared shrewdly at Tanis, then beckoned the half-elf forward. His words were cool, his manner polite, if strange. "Is it indeed you, Tanis, son of my brother? The years have been long, and all have wondered about your fate. We welcome you back to your homeland, though I fear you come only to see its fine days. My daughter in particular will be glad to see you. She has missed her childhood play." Gilgamesh stiffened, his face darkening, as he looked at Tanis. The half-elf felt his own face flush. He bowed low before the speaker, unable to say a word. "I welcome the rest of you, and hope to learn more of you later. I shall not keep you long, but it is right that you learn in this room what is happening in the world. Then you will be allowed to rest and refresh yourselves. Now, my son." The speaker turned to Gilgamesh, obviously thankful to end the formalities. "The raid on Paxthakis." Gilgamesh stepped forward, his head bowed. "I have failed, Speaker of the Suns." A murmur passed among the elves, like the wind among the aspens. The speaker's face bore no expression. He simply sighed and stared unseeing out a tall window. "Tell your story," he said quietly. Gilgamesh swallowed, then spoke, his voice so low, many in the back of the room leaned forward to hear. "I traveled south with my warriors secretly, as was planned. All went well. We found a group of human resistance fighters, refugees from Gateway who joined us, adding to our numbers. Then, by the cruelest mischance, we stumbled into the advanced patrols of the Dragon Army. We fought valiantly, elves and humans together, but for naught. I was struck on the head and remember nothing more. When I awoke, I was lying in a ravine surrounded by the bodies of my comrades. Apparently, the foul dragon men shoved the wounded over the cliff, leaving us for dead." Gilgamesh paused, clearing his throat. "Druids in the woods tended my engines. From them I learned that many of my warriors were still alive,
had been taken prisoner. Leaving the druids to bury the dead, I followed the tracks of the dragon army and eventually came to Solace. Gilthanas stopped. His face glistened with sweat and his hands twitched nervously. He cleared his throat again, tried to speak, and failed. His father watched him with growing concern. Gilthanas spoke. Solace is destroyed. There was a gasp from the audience. The mighty Valenwoods had been cut and burned. Few now stand. The elves wailed and cried out in dismay and anger. The speaker held up his hand for order. This is grievous news, he said sternly. We mourn the passing of trees old even to us. But continue. What about people? I found my men tied to stakes in the center of the town square, along with the humans who had helped us, Gilthanas said, his voice breaking. They were surrounded by draconian guards. I hoped to be able to free them at night. Then his voice failed completely, and he bowed his head as his older brother came over and laid a hand on his shoulder. Gilthanas screamed. A red dragon appeared in the sky. Sounds of shock and dismay came from the assembled elves. The speaker shook his head in sorrow. Yes, speaker, Gilthanas said, and his voice was loud, unnaturally loud and jarring. It is true. These monsters have returned to Kryn. The red dragon circled above Solace, and all who saw him fled in terror. He flew lower and lower, and then landed in the town square. His great, gleaming red reptile body filled the clearing. His wings spread destruction. His tail toppled trees. Yellow fangs glistened. Green saliva dripped from his massive jaws. His huge talons tore the ground, and hanging upon his back was a human male. Powerfully built, he was dressed in the black robes of a cleric of the Queen of Darkness. A black and gold cape fluttered around him. His face was hidden by a hideous, horned mask, fashioned in black and gold to resemble the face of a dragon. The dragon men fell to their knees in worship as the dragon landed. The goblins and hobgoblins and foul humans who fight with the dragon men cowered in terror. Many ran away. Only the example of my people gave me the courage to stay. Now that he was speaking, Gilthanas seemed eager to tell the story. Some of the humans tied to the stake went into a frenzy of terror, screaming piteously. But my warriors remained calm and defiant, although all were affected alike by the dragon fear the monster generates. The dragon rider did not seem to find this pleasing. He glared at them, and then spoke in a voice that came from the depths of the abyss. His words still burn in my mind. I am Verminard, Dragon High Lord of the North. I have fought to free this land and these people from the false beliefs spread by those who call themselves Seekers. Many have come to work for me, pleased to further the great cause of the Dragon High Lords. I have shown them mercy and graced them with the blessings my goddess has granted me. Spells of healing I possess, as do no others in this land, and therefore you know that I am the representative of the true gods. But you humans who stand before me now have defied me. You chose to fight me, and therefore your punishment will serve as an example to any others who choose folly over wisdom. Then he turned to the elves and said, Be it known by this act that I, Verminard, will destroy your race utterly, as decreed by my goddess. Humans can be taught to see the errors of their ways, but elves, Never. The man's voice rose until it raged louder than the winds. Let this be your final warning, all who watch. Ember, destroy. And with that, the great dragon breathed out fire upon all those tied to the stakes. They writhed helplessly, burning to death in terrible agony. There was no sound at all in the chamber. The shock and horror were too great for words. Madness swept over me. Gilthanas continued, his eyes burning feverishly, almost a reflection of what he had seen. I started to rush forward, to die with my people, when a great hand grasped me and dragged me backward. It was Theros Ironfeld. Now is not the time to die, Elf, he told me. Now is the time for revenge. I collapsed then, and he took me back to his house, in peril of his own life. And he would have paid for his kindness to elves with his life, had not this woman healed him. Gilthanas pointed to Gold Moon, who stood at the back of the group, her face shrouded by her fur cape. The speaker turned to stare at her, as did the other elves in the chamber, their murmurings dark and ominous. Therios is the man brought here today, speaker, Portheos said. The man with but one arm. Our healers say he will live, but they say it is only by a miracle that his life was spared, so dreadful were his wounds. Come forward, woman of the plains, the speaker commanded sternly. Gold Moon took a step toward the rostrum, Riverwind at her side. Two elven guards moved swiftly to block him. He glared at them, but stood where he was. The chieftain's daughter moved forward, holding her head proudly. As she removed her hood, the sun shone on the silver-gold hair cascading down her back. The elves marveled at her beauty. You claim to have healed this man, Theros Ironfeld? The speaker asked her with disdain. I claim nothing, Gold Moon answered coolly. Your son saw me heal him. Do you doubt his words? No, but he was overwrought, sick and confused. He may have mistaken witchcraft for healing. Look on this, Gold Moon said gently, and untied her cape, letting it fall away from her neck. The medallion sparkled in the sunlight. The speaker left the rostrum and came forward, his eyes widening in dismay. Then his face became distorted with rage. Blasphemy! He shouted. Reaching out, he started to rip the medallion from Gold Moon's throat. There was a flash of blue light. The speaker crumbled to the floor with a cry of pain. As the elves shouted out in alarm, drawing their swords, the companions drew theirs. Elven warriors rushed to surround them. Stop this nonsense, said the old magician in a strong, stern voice. Fizban tottered up to the rostrum, calmly pushing aside the sword blades as if they were slender branches of an aspen tree. The elves stared in astonishment, seemingly unable to stop him. Muttering to himself, Fizban came up to the speaker, who was lying stunned on the floor. The old man helped the elf to his feet. Now then, you asked for that, you know, Fizban scolded, brushing the speaker's robes as the elf gaped at him. Who are you? The speaker gasped. What was that name? The old magician glanced around at Tasselhoff. Fizban, the Kender said helpfully. Yes, Fizban. That's who I am. The magician stroked his white beard. Now, Solostaren, I suggest you call off your guards and tell everyone to settle down. I, for one, would like to hear the story of this young woman's adventures, and you, for one, would do well to listen. It wouldn't hurt you to apologize either.
As Fizban shook his finger at the speaker, his battered hat tilted forward, covering his eyes.
Help! I've gone blind.
Raceland, with a distrustful glance at the elven guards, hurried forward. He took the old man's arm and straightened his hat.
Oh, thank the true gods,
the magician said, blinking and shuffling across the floor. The speaker watched the old magician, a puzzled expression on his face. Then, as if in a dream, he turned to face Gold Moon.
I do apologize, Lady of the Plains,
he said softly.
It has been over 300 years since the elven clerics vanished. 300 years since the symbol of Mishikar was seen in this land. My heart bled to see the amulet profaned, as I thought. Forgive me. We have been in despair so long, I failed to see the arrival of hope. Please, if you are not weary, tell us your story.
Gold Moon related the story of the medallion, telling of Riverwind and the stoning, the meeting of the companions at the inn, and their journey to Zak Tsaro. She told of the destruction of the dragon and how she received the medallion of Mishikar. But she didn't mention the discs. The sun's rays lengthened as she spoke, changing color as twilight approached. When her story ended, the speaker was silent for long moments.
I must consider all of this and what it means to us,
he said finally. He turned to the companions.
You are exhausted. I see some of you stand by courage alone. Indeed,
he smiled, looking at Fizban, who leaned against a pillar, snoring softly.
Some of you are asleep on your feet. My daughter, Lorana, will guide you to a place where you can forget your fears. We will hold a banquet in your honor tonight, for you bring us hope. May the peace of the true gods go with you.
The elves parted, and out of their midst came an elf maiden who walked forward to stand beside the speaker. At the sight of her, Caraman's mouth sagged open. Riverwind's eyes widened. Even Raceland stared, his eyes seeing beauty at last, for no hint of decay touched the young elf maiden. Her hair was honey pouring from a pitcher. It spilled over her arms and down her back, past her waist, touching her wrists as she stood with her arms at her sides. Her skin was smooth and woodland brown. She had the delicate, refined features of the elves, but these were combined with full, powdered and large, liquid eyes that changed color, like beads in flickering sunshine.
On my honor as a knight,
Sturm said with a catch in his voice.
I've never seen any woman so lovely. Nor will you in this world, Tanis murmured.
All the companions glanced at Tanis sharply as he spoke, but the half-elf did not notice. His eyes were on the elf maid. Sturm raised his eyebrows, exchanged looks with Caraman, who nudged his brother. Flint shook his head and sighed a sigh that seemed to come from his toes. Now, much is made clear, Gold Moon said to Riverwind.
It hasn't been made clear to me, Tasselhoff said. Do you know what's going on, Tika?
All Tika knew was that, looking at Lorana, she felt suddenly dumpy and half-dressed, freckled and red-headed. She tugged her blouse up higher over her full bosom, wishing it didn't reveal quite so much, or that she had less to reveal.
Tell me what's going on,
Tasselhoff whispered, seeing the knowing looks exchanged by the others.
I don't know,
Tika snapped.
Just that Caraman's making a fool of himself. Look at the big ox. You'd think he'd never seen a woman before. She is pretty, Tass said. Different from you, Tika. She's slender and she walks like a tree, bending in the wind and... Oh, shut up, Tika snapped furiously, giving Tass a shove that nearly knocked him down. Tasselhoff gave her a wounded glance, then walked over to stand beside Tanis, determined to keep near the half-elf until he figured out what was going on. I welcome you to Qualinost, honored guests, Lorana said shyly, in a voice that was like a clear stream rippling among the trees. Please follow me. The way is not far, and there is food and drink and rest at the end. Moving with childlike grace, she walked among the companions who parted for her as the elves had done, all of them staring at her admiringly. Lorana lowered her eyes in maidenly modesty and self-consciousness, her cheeks flushing. She looked up only once, and that was as she passed Tanis, a fleeting glance that only Tanis saw. His face grew troubled, his eyes darkened. The companions left the Tower of the Sun, waking Fizban as they departed. Chapter 6. Tanis and Lorana. Lorana led them to a sun-dappled grove of aspens in the very center of the city. Here, though surrounded by buildings and streets, they seemed to be in the heart of a forest. Only the murmurings of a nearby brook broke the stillness. Lorana, gesturing toward fruit trees among the aspens, told the companions to pick and eat their food. Elf maids brought in baskets of fresh, fragrant bread. The companions washed in the brook, then returned to relax on soft moss beds to revel in the silent peacefulness around them. All except Tanis. Refusing food, the half-elf wandered around the grove, absorbed in his own thoughts. Tasselhoff watched him closely, eaten alive by curiosity. Lorana was a perfect, charming hostess. She made certain everyone was seated and comfortable, speaking a few words to each of them. Flint Fireforge, isn't it? She said. The dwarf flushed with pleasure. I still have some of the wonderful toys you made. We have missed you these many years. So flustered he couldn't talk, Flint plopped down on the grass and gulped down a huge mug of water. You are Tika? Lorana asked, stopping by the barmaid. Tika Whalen, the girl said huskily. Tika, what a pretty name, and what beautiful hair you have, Lorana said, reaching out to touch the bouncy red curls, admiring. Do you think so? Tika said, blushing, seeing Caraman's eyes on her. Of course. It is the color of flame. You must have a spirit to match. I heard how you saved my brother's life in the inn, Tika. I am deeply indebted to you. Thank you, Tika answered softly. Your hair is real pretty too. Lorana smiled and moved on. Tasselhoff noticed, however, that her eyes constantly strayed to Tanis. When the half-elf suddenly threw down an apple and disappeared into the trees, Lorana excused herself hurriedly and followed. Ah, now I'll find out what's going on, Tass said to himself. Glancing around, he slipped after Tanis. Tass crept along the winding trail among the trees and suddenly came upon the half-elf standing beside the foaming stream alone, tossing dead leaves into the water. Seeing movement to his left, Tass quickly crouched down into a clump of bushes as Lorana emerged from another trail. Tantalas, quisif nan pa, she called. As Tanis turned at the sound of his elven name, she flung her arms around his neck, kissing him. "Ugh," she said teasingly, pulling back. "Shave off that horrible beard. It itches. And you don't look like Tantalus anymore." Tanis put his hands to her waist and gently pushed her away. "Lorana," he began. "No, don't be mad about the beard. I'll learn to like it if you insist." Lorana pleaded, pouting. "Kiss me back." "No? Then I'll kiss you until you cannot help yourself." She kissed him again until finally Tanis broke free of her grip. "Stop it, Lorana," he said harshly, turning away. "Why? What's the matter?" she asked, catching hold of his hand. "You've been gone so many years, and now you're back. Don't be cold and gloomy. You are my betrothed, remember? It is proper for a girl to kiss her betrothed." "That was a long time ago," Tanis said. "We were children then, playing a game. Nothing more. It was romantic, a secret to share. You know what would have happened if your father had found out. Gilthanas did find out, didn't he?" "Of course. I told him," Lorana said, hanging her head, looking up at Tanis through her long eyelashes. "I tell Gilthanas everything, you know that. I didn't think he'd react like that. I know what he said to you. He told me later. He felt badly." "I'll bet he did." Tanis gripped her wrists, holding her hands still. "What he said was true, Lorana. I am a bastard half-breed. Your father would have every right to kill me. How could I bring disgrace down on him after what he did for my mother and me? That was one reason I left. That, and to find out who I am and where I belong." "You are Tantalus, my beloved, and you belong here," Lorana cried. She broke free of his grip and caught his hands in her own. "Look, you wear my ring still. I know why you left. It was because you were afraid to love me, but you don't need to be, not anymore. Everything's changed. Father has so much to worry about, he won't mind. Besides, you're a hero now. Please let us be married. Isn't that why you came back?" "Lorana," Tanis spoke gently but firmly. "My returning was an accident." "No," she cried, pushing him away. "I don't believe you." "You must have heard Gilthanas' story. If Portheos had not rescued us, we would have been in Pax Thargus now." "He made it up. He didn't want to tell me the truth. You came back because you love me. I won't listen to anything else." "I didn't want to tell you, but I see that I must," Tanis said, exasperated. "Lorana, I'm in love with someone else, a human woman. Her name is Gitiara. That doesn't mean I don't love you too. I do." Tanis faltered. Lorana stared at him, all color drained from her face. "I do love you, Lorana. But you see, I can't marry you because I love her too. My heart is divided, just like my blood." He took off the ring of golden ivy leaves and handed it to her. "I release you from any promises you made to me, Lorana, and I ask you to release me." Lorana took the ring, unable to speak. She looked at Tanis pleadingly, then, seeing only pity on his face, shrieked and flung the ring away from her. It fell at Tas's feet. He picked it up and slipped it into a pouch. "Lorana," Tanis said sorrowfully, taking her in his arms as she sobbed wildly. "I'm so sorry. I never meant." At this point,
Tasselhoff slipped out of the brush and made his way back up the trail. "Well," said the Kender to himself, sighing in satisfaction. "Now at least I know what's going on." Tanis woke suddenly to find Gilthanas standing over him. "Lorana?" he asked, getting to his feet. "She is all right," Gilthanas said quietly. "Her maidens brought her home. She told me what you said. I just want you to know I understand. It was what I feared all along. The human half of you cries to other humans. I tried to tell her, hoping she wouldn't get hurt. She will listen to me now. Thank you, Tantalus. I know it cannot have been easy." "It wasn't," Tanis said, swallowing. "I'm going to be honest, Gilthanas. I love her. I really do. It's just that, please, say no more. Let us leave it as it is, and perhaps if we cannot be friends, we can at least respect each other." Gilthanas's face was drawn and pale in the setting sun. "You and your friends must prepare yourselves. When the silver moon rises, there will be a feast, and then the High Council meeting. Now is the time when decisions must be made." He left. Tanis stared after him a moment, then, sighing, went to wake the others. Chapter 7. Farewell. The Companion's Decision. The feast, held in Qualinost, reminded Gold Moon of her mother's funeral banquet. Like the feast, the funeral was supposed to be a joyous occasion. After all, Tearsong had become a goddess. But the people found it difficult to accept the death of this beautiful woman, and so the Kuei Shu mourned her passing with a grief that approached blasphemy. Tearsong's funeral banquet was the most elaborate to be given in the memory of the Kuei Shu. Her grieving husband had spared no expense. Like the banquet in Qualinost on this night, there was a great deal of food which few could eat. There were half-hearted attempts at conversation when no one wanted to talk. Occasionally, someone, overcome with sorrow, was forced to leave the table. So vivid was this memory that Gold Moon could eat little. The food was ash in her mouth. Riverwind regarded her with concern. His hand found hers beneath the table, and she gripped it hard, smiling as his strength flowed into her body. The elven feast was held in the courtyard just south of the great golden tower. There were no walls about the platform of the crystal and marble which sat atop the highest hill in Qualinost, offering an unobstructed view of the glittering city below, the dark forest beyond, and even the deep purple edge of the Tharkadan Mountains far to the south. But the beauty was lost on those in attendance, or made more poignant by the knowledge that soon it would be gone forever. Gold Moon sat at the right hand of the speaker. He tried to make polite conversation, but eventually his worries and concerns overwhelmed him, and he fell silent. To the speaker's left sat his daughter, Lorana. She made no pretense at eating, just sat with her head bowed, her long hair flowing around her face. When she did look up, it was to gaze at Tanis, her heart in her eyes. The half-elf, very much aware of the heartbroken stare as well as of Gilthanas eyeing him coldly, ate his food without appetite, his eyes fixed on his plate. Sturm, next to him, was drawing up in his mind plans for the defense of Qualinesti. Flint felt strange and out of place, as dwarves always feel among elves. He didn't like elven food anyway and refused everything. Raistlin nibbled at his food absently, his golden eyes studying Fizban. Tika, feeling awkward and out of place among the graceful elven women, couldn't eat a morsel. Karaman decided he knew why elves were so slender. The food consisted of fruits and vegetables, cooked in delicate sauces, served with bread and cheese and a very light, spicy wine. After starving for 4 days in the cage, the food did nothing to satisfy the big warrior's hunger. The only two in the entire city of Krolinost to enjoy the feast were Tasselhoff and Fizbag. The old magician carried on a one-sided argument with an aspen, while Tasselhoff simply enjoyed everything, discovering later, to his surprise, that 2 golden spoons, a silver knife, and a butter dish made of a seashell had wandered into one of his pouches. The red moon was not visible. Solinari, a slim band of silver in the sky, began to wane. As the first stars appeared, the speaker of the suns nodded sadly at his son. Gilthanas rose and moved to stand next to his father's chair. Gilthanas began to sing. The elven words flowed into a melody, delicate and beautiful. As he sang, Gilthanas held a small crystal lamp in both hands, the candlelight within illuminating his marble features. Tanis, listening to the song, closed his eyes. His head sank into his hands. What is it? What do the words mean? Sturm asked softly. Tanis raised his head. His voice breaking, he whispered, "The sun, the splendid eye of all our heavens, dies from the day, and leaves the dozing sky spangled with fireflies, deepening in grey." The elves about the table stood quietly now, taking up their own lamps as they joined in the song. Their voices blended, weaving a haunting song of infinite sadness. Now sleep. Our oldest friend lolls in the trees and calls us in. The leaves give off cold fire. They blaze into ash at the end of the year. And birds coast on the winds and wheel to the north when autumn ends. The day grows dark, seasons bare, but we await the sun's green fire upon the trees. Points of flickering lantern light spread from the courtyard like ripples in a still, calm pond, through the streets, into the forests and beyond. And with each lamp lit, another voice was raised in song, until the surrounding forest itself seemed to sing with despair. The wind dives through the day. By season, by moon, great kingdoms arise. Breath, firefly, bird, trees of mankind fades in a word. Now sleep. Our oldest friend lolls in the trees and calls us in. The age, the 1,000 lives of men and their stories, go to their graves, but we, the people long, in poem and glory, fade from the soul. Gilthanas's voice died away. With a gentle breath, he blew out the flame of his lamp. One by one, as they had started, the others around the table ended the song and blew out their candles. All through Krolinost, the voices hushed, and the flames were extinguished until it seemed that silence and darkness swept over the land. At the very end, only the distant mountains returned to the final chords of the song, like the whispering leaves falling to the ground. The speaker stood. "And now," he said heavily, "it is time for the meeting of the High Council. It will be held in the Hall of the Sky. Tantalus, if you will lead your companions there." The Hall of the Sky, they discovered, was a huge square lit by torches. The giant dome of the heavens, glittering with stars, arched above it. But it was dark to the north, where lightning played on the horizon. The speaker motioned to Tanis to bring the companions to stand near him. Then the entire population of Qualinost gathered around them. There was no need to call for silence. Even the wind hushed as the speaker began. Here you see our situation. He gestured at something on the ground. The companions saw a gigantic map beneath their feet. Tasselhoff, standing in the middle of the plains of Abyssinia, drew in a deep breath. He couldn't remember ever seeing anything so wonderful. "There's Solace!" he cried in excitement, pointing.
"Yes, Kenderkin," the speaker replied. "And that is where the dragon armies mass. In Solace." He touched the spot on the map with a staff. "And in Haven. Lord Verminard has made no secret of his plans to invade Qualinesti. He waits only to gather his forces and supply routes. We cannot hope to stand against such a horde."
"Surely Qualinost is easily defended," Sturm spoke up. "There is no direct route over land. We crossed bridges over ravines that no army in existence could get through if the bridges were cut. Why do you not stand up to them?"
"If it were only an army, we could defend Qualinesti," the speaker answered. "But what can we do against dragons?" The speaker spread his hands helplessly. "Nothing. According to legends, it was only with the Dragonlance that the mighty Humor defeated them. There are none now, at least that we know of, who remember the secret of that great weapon." Fizban started to speak, but Raistlin hushed him. "No," the speaker continued. "We must abandon this city and these woods. We plan to go west, into the unknown lands, there, hoping to find a new home for our people, or perhaps even return to Sylvanesti, the most ancient elven home. Until a week ago, our plans were advancing well. It will take 3 days of forced marching for the Dragon High Lord to move his men into attack position, and spies will inform us when the army leaves Solace. We will have time to escape into the west. But then we learned of a third dragon army at Pax Tharkus, less than a day's journey from us. Unless that army is stopped, we are doomed." "And you know a way to stop that army?" Tanis asked. "Yes." The speaker looked at his youngest son. "As you know, men from Gateway and Solace and surrounding communities are being held prisoner in the fortress of Pax Tharkus, working as slaves for the Dragon High Lord. Verminard is clever. Lest his slaves revolt, he keeps the women and children of these men hostages, ransom for the men's behavior. It is our belief that, were these captives freed, the men would turn on their masters and destroy them. It was to have been Gilthanas's mission to free the hostages and lead the revolt. He would have taken the humans south into the mountains, drawing off this third army in pursuit, allowing us time to escape." "And what of the humans then?" Riverwind asked harshly. "It seems to me you throw them to the dragon armies as a desperate man throws hunks of meat to pursuing wolves." "Lord Verminard will not keep them alive much longer, we fear. The ore is nearly gone. He is gleaning every last little bit. Then the slave's usefulness to him will end. There are valleys in the mountains, caves where the humans can live and fend off the dragon armies. They can easily hold the mountain passes against them, especially now that winter is setting in. Admittedly, some may die, but that is a price that must be paid. If you had the choice, man of the plains, would you rather die in slavery or die fighting?" Riverwind, not answering, stared down at the map darkly. "Gilthanas's mission failed," Tanis said. "And now you want us to try and lead the revolt?" "Yes, Tantalas," the speaker replied. "Gilthanas knows a way into Pax Tharkus, the Slamori. He can lead you into the fortress. You not only have a chance to free your own kind, but you offer the elves a chance to escape.
The speaker's voice hardened.
A chance to live. That many elves were not given when humans brought the cataclysm down upon us.
Riverwind glanced up, scowling. Even Sturm's expression darkened. The speaker drew a deep breath, then sighed.
Please forgive me, he said. I do not mean to flog you with whips from the past. We are not uncaring about the human's plight. I send my son Gilthanas with you willingly, knowing that if we part, we may never see each other again. I make this sacrifice so that my people and yours may live.
We must have time to consider, Tanis said, though he knew what his decision must be. The speaker nodded, and elven warriors cleared a path through the crowd, leading the companions to a grove of trees. Here, they left them alone. Tanis's friends stood before him, their solemn faces masks of light and shadow beneath the stars. All this time, he thought, I have fought to keep us together. Now I see that we must separate. We cannot risk taking the discs into Pax Tharkus, and Gold Moon will not leave them behind. I will go to Pax Tharkus, Tanis said softly. But I believe it is time now that we separate, my friends. Before you speak, let me say this. I would send Tika, Gold Moon, Riverwind, Caraman, and Raceland, and you, Fizban, with the elves, in hopes that you may carry the discs to safety. The discs are too precious to risk on a raid into Pax Tharkus.
That may be half-elf,
Raceland whispered from the depths of his cowl.
but it is not among the Qualinesti elves that Gold Moon will find the one she seeks.
How do you know? Tanis asked, startled. He doesn't know anything, Tanis, Sturm interrupted, bitterly. More talk. Raceland, Tanis repeated, ignoring Sturm.
You heard the night.
The mage hissed.
I know nothing.
Tanis sighed, letting it go, and glanced around. You named me your leader.
Aye, we did, lad,
said Flint suddenly.
But this decision is coming from your head, not your heart. Deep inside, you don't really believe we should split up.
Well, I'm not staying with these elves, Tika said, folding her arms across her chest. I'm going with you, Tanis. I plan to become a swordswoman like Kitiara. Tanis winced. Hearing Kitiara's name was like a physical blow. I will not hide with elves, Riverwind said, especially if it means leaving my kind behind to fight for me. He and I are one, Gold Moon said, putting her hand on his arm. Besides, she said more softly, somehow I know that what the mage says is true. The leader is not among the elves. They want to flee the world, not fight for it.
We're all going, Tanis,
Flint said firmly. The half-elf looked helplessly around at the group. Then he smiled and shook his head. You're right. I didn't truly believe we should separate. It's the sensible, logical thing to do, of course. Which is why we won't do it.
Oh, maybe we can get some sleep.
Fizban yawned. Wait a minute, old one. Tanis said sternly. You are not one of us. You're definitely going with the elves.
Am I?
The mage asked softly, as his eyes lost their vague, unfocused look. He stared at Tanis with such a penetrating, almost menacing gaze that the half-elf involuntarily took a step back, suddenly sensing an almost palpable aura of power surrounding the old man. His voice was soft and intense.
I go where I choose in this world. I choose to go with you, Tanis, half-elven.
Raistlin glanced at Tanis as if to say, "Now you understand." Tanis, irresolute, returned the glance. He regretted putting off discussing this with Raistlin, but wondered how they could confer now, knowing the old man would not leave. "I speak this to you, Raistlin," Tanis said suddenly, using camp talk, a corrupted form of common developed among the racially mixed mercenaries of Bryn. The twins had done a bit of mercenary work in their time, as had most of the companions, in order to eat. Tanis knew Raistlin would understand. He was fairly certain the old man would.
We talk if one,
Raistlin answered in the same language.
but little know I.
"You fear. Why?" Raistlin's strange eyes stared far away as he answered slowly.
I know not, Tanis, but you are right. Their power be within Old One. I feel great power. I fear.
His eyes gleamed.
And I hunger.
The mage sighed and seemed to return from wherever it was he had been.
But he right. Try to stop him. Very much danger.
As if there wasn't enough already. Tanis said bitterly, switching back to common. "We take our own in with us, in the form of a doddering old magician."
Others there are. As dangerous.
Raistlin said with a meaningful look at his brother. Returned to common.
I am weary.
"Yes," Caraman answered, exchanging glances with Stern. "We're going to talk with Tanis." Raistlin nodded and gave his arm to Fizben. The old mage and the young one left, the old mage lashing out at a tree with his staff, accusing it of trying to sneak up on him.
As if one crazed mage wasn't bad enough, Flint muttered. I'm going to bed.
One by one, the others left until Tanis stood with Caraman and Sturm. Wearily, Tanis turned to face them. He had a feeling he knew what this was going to be about. Caraman's face was flushed, and he stared at his feet. Sturm stroked his moustaches and regarded Tanis thoughtfully. "Well?" Tanis asked. "Gilthanas," Sturm answered. Tanis frowned and scratched his beard. "That's my business, not yours," he said shortly. "It is our business, Tanis," Sturm persisted. "If he's leading us into Pax Tharkus, we don't want to pry, but it's obvious there's a score to settle between you two. I've seen his eyes when he looks at you, Tanis, and if I were you, I wouldn't go anywhere without a threat at my back." Caraman looked at Tanis earnestly, his brow furrowed. "I know he's an elf and all," the big man said slowly, "but like Sturm says, he gets a funny look in his eyes sometimes. Don't you know the way to this Sla Mori? Can't we find it ourselves? I don't trust him. Neither do Sturm and Raist." "Listen, Tanis," Sturm said, seeing the half-elf's face darken with anger. "If Gilthanas was in such danger in Solace as he claimed, why was he casually sitting in the inn? And then there's his story about his warriors accidentally running into a whole damn army. Tanis, don't shake your head so quickly. He may not be evil, just misguided. What if Verminard's got some hold over him? Perhaps the Dragon High Lord convinced him he'd spare his people if, in return, he betrays us. Maybe that's why he was in Solace, waiting for us." "That's ridiculous," Tanis snapped. "How would he know we were coming?" "We didn't exactly keep our journey from Saroth to Solace secret," Sturm returned coldly. "We saw Draconians all along the way, and those that escaped Saroth must have realized we came for the discs. Verminard probably knows our descriptions better than he knows his own mother." "No, I don't believe it," Tanis said angrily, glaring at Sturm and Caraman. "You two are wrong. I'll stake my life on it. I grew up with Gilthanas. I know him. Yes, there is a score to settle between us, but we have discussed it, and the matter is closed. I'll believe he's a traitor to his people the day I believe you are Caraman turned traitor, and no, I don't know the way to Pax Starkus. I've never been there. And one more thing, Tanis shouted, now in a fury. If there's people I don't trust in this group, it's that brother of yours and that old man. He stared accusingly at Caraman. The big man grew pale and lowered his eyes. He began to turn away. Tanis came to his senses, suddenly realizing what he had said. I'm sorry, Caraman. He put his hand on the warrior's arm. I didn't mean that. Racelands saved our lives more than once on this insane journey. It's just that I can't believe Gilthanas is a traitor. We know, Tanis, Sturm said quietly, and we trust your judgment. But it's too dark a night to walk with your eyes closed, as my people say. Tanis sighed and nodded. He put his other hand on Sturm's arm. The knight clasped him, and the three men stood in silence. Then they left the grove and walked back to the Hall of the Sky. They could still hear the speaker talking with his warriors. What does Slán Mori mean? Caraman asked. Secret way, Tanis answered. Tanis woke with a start, his hand on the dagger at his belt. A dark shape crouched over him in the night, blotting out the stars overhead. Reaching up quickly, he grabbed hold of and yanked the person down across his body, putting his dagger to the exposed throat. Tantalus! There was a small scream at the sight of the steel flashing in the starlight. Lorana! Tanis gasped. Her body pressed against his. He could feel her trembling, and now that he was fully awake, he could see the long hair flowing loosely about her shoulders. She was dressed only in a flimsy night dress. Her cloak had fallen off in the brief struggle. Acting on impulse, Lorana had risen from her bed and slipped out into the night, throwing a cloak around her to protect her from the cold. Now she lay across Tanis's chest, too frightened to move. This was a side of Tanis she had never known existed. She realized suddenly that if she had been an enemy, she would be dead now, her throat slit. Lorana, Tanis repeated, thrusting the dagger back into his belt with a shaking hand. He pushed her away and sat up, angry at himself for frightening her and angry at her for awakening something deep within him. For an instant, when she lay on top of him, he was acutely conscious only of the smell of her hair, the warmth of her slender body, the play of the muscles in her thighs, the softness of her small breast. Lorana had been a girl when he left. He returned to find a woman, a very beautiful, desirable woman. What in the name of the abyss are you doing here at this time of night? Tantalus, she said, choking, pulling her cape around her tightly. I came to ask you to change your mind. Let your friends go to free the humans in Pax Starkus. You must come with us. Don't throw your life away. My father is desperate. He doesn't believe this will work. I know he doesn't. But he hasn't any choice. He's already mourning Gilthanas as if he were dead. I'm going to lose my brother. I can't lose you too. She began to sob. Tanis glanced around hastily. There were almost certainly elven guards around. If the elves caught him in this compromising situation, Lorana, he said, gripping her shoulders and shaking her. You're not a child anymore. You've got to grow up and grow up fast. I wouldn't let my friends face danger without me. I know the risks we are taking. I'm not blind. But if we can free the humans from Verminard and give you and your people time to escape, it's a chance we have to take. There comes a time, Lorana, when you've got to risk your life for something you believe in. Something that means more than life itself.
Do you understand?
She looked up at him through a mass of golden hair. Her sobs stopped, and she ceased to tremble. She stared at him very intently. Do you understand, Laura? He repeated. Yes, Tempest. She answered softly. I understand. Good. He sighed. Now go back to bed. Quickly. You put me in danger. If Gilfinash saw us like this, Lorana stood up and walked swiftly from the grove, flitting along the streets and buildings like the wind among the aspens. Sneaking past the guards to get back inside her father's dwelling was simple. She and Gilfinash
Hey, Soy,
had
how
been
you
doing it
doing?
since childhood.
You know what?
Returning
Let's do
quietly
another dab.
She stood outside her father's and
Hope you're
mother's
doing
door,
well, Soy.
listening. There was light inside. She could hear parchment rustling, smell an acrid odor. Her father was burning papers. She heard her mother's soft murmur calling her father to bed. Lorana closed her eyes.
How's your evening going, Soy?
Then her lips tightened in firm resolve, and she ran down the dark, chill hallway to her bedchamber. Chapter 8. Doubts. Ambush. A new friend. The elves woke the companions before dawn. Storm clouds lowered on the northern horizon, reaching like grasping fingers toward Qualinasti. Gilfinash arrived after breakfast, dressed in a tunic.
I'm not doing
blue
too
cloth,
bad. I
and
can't
a suit
complain
of
too
chain
much.
mail. We have supplies.
Well, I can,
he
but
said,
ain't no one gonna
gesturing
care.
toward warriors who held packs in their hands. We can also provide weapons or armament you have need. Tika needs armor and shield and sword, said Karen. We will provide what we can, Gilfinash said. Though I doubt if we have a full set of armor small enough. How is Theros Armfell this morning? Gold Moon asked. He rests comfortably, cleric of Mishikai. Gilfinash bowed respectfully to Gold Moon. My people will, of course, take him with them when we leave. You may bid him farewell. Elves soon returned with armor of every description for Tika and a lightweight short sword favored by the elven women. Tika's eyes glowed when she saw the helm and shield. Both were of elvish design, tooled and decorated with jewels. Gilfinash took the helm and shield from the elf. I have yet to thank you for saving my life in the inn, he said to Tika. Accept these. They are my mother's ceremonial armor, dating back to the time of the Kinslayer Wars. These would have gone to my sister, but Lorana and I both believe you are the proper owner. I'll help. Karaman offered eagerly. I have this. Goldmoon said firmly. Picking up the armor, she led Tika into a grove of trees. What does she know about armor? Karaman grumbled. Goldmoon looked at the warrior and smiled. An infrequent smile that softened his stern face. You forget, he said. She is chieftain's daughter. It was her duty in her father's absence to lead the tribe to war. She knows a great deal about armor, warrior, and even more about the heart that beats beneath.
That was a rough one there.
Karaman flushed. Nervously, he picked up a pack of supplies and glanced inside. What's this junk? He asked. Queethpa, said Gilfinash. Iron rations, in your language. It will last us many weeks, if need be. It looks like dried fruit, Karaman said in disgust. That's what it is, Tanis replied, grinning. Karaman groaned. Dawn was just beginning to split wispy storm clouds with a pale, chill light when Gilfanas led the party out of Qualinasti. Tanis kept his eyes straight ahead, refusing to look back. He wished that his final trip here could have been happier. He had not seen Lorana all morning, and though he felt relieved to have avoided a tearful farewell, he secretly wondered why she hadn't come to bid him goodbye. The trail moved south, descending gradually but constantly. It had been thick and overgrown with brush, but the party of warriors Gilfanas led before had cleared it as they moved, so that walking was relatively easy. Caraman walked beside Tika, resplendent in her mismatched armor.
How you been
instructing
doing,
her on
Soy?
the use of her sword. Unfortunately, the teacher was having a bad time of it. Gold Moon had slipped Tika's red barmaid skirt up to her thighs for easier movement. Bits of fluffy white from Tika's fur-trimmed undergarments peeped enticingly through the slits. Her legs were visible as she walked, and the girl's legs were just as Caraman had always imagined, round and well-formed. Thus, Caraman found it rather difficult to concentrate on his lesson. Absorbed in his pupil, he did not notice that his brother had disappeared. "Where's the young mage?" Gilfanas asked harshly. "Maybe something's happened to him," Caraman said, worriedly, cursing himself for forgetting his brother. The warrior withdrew his sword and started back along the trail. "Nonsense!" Gilfanas stopped him. "What could have happened to him? There is no enemy for miles. He must have gone off somewhere for some purpose." "What are you saying?" Caraman asked, glowering. "Maybe he left to collect what I need for the making of my magic elf," Raceland whispered, emerging from the brush. "And to replenish the herbs that heal my core." "Raced." Caraman nearly hugged him in his relief. "You shouldn't go off by yourself. It's dangerous." "My spell components are secret," Raceland whispered, irritated.
It's a good size.
Leaning on the staff of mages, the mage
That
rejoined Fizban in the line.
I like it, but it's mainly made for like
Cast a sharp glance at Tanis,
doing a
who
hit at a
shrugged and
time.
shook his head.
Like I'll put a dab
As
in
the
there,
group
take a
continued
rip.
on, the trail became
Someone else wants to
steep
dab,
and
I'll put a
steep,
dab in there, then
leading
take a
down
rip.
from the aspen woods to the pines of the lowlands.
Let's do another
It
one.
joined up with a clear brook that soon became a
Do
raging
one more.
stream as they traveled farther south. When they stopped for a hasty lunch, Fizban came over and hunkered down beside
It's not
him.
bad for winning it in a giveaway.
He said in a penetrating whisper. "What?" Tanis asked, his head snapping up to stare at the old man incredulously. "Yes, indeed." The old mage nodded solemnly. "I've seen it, darting in and out among the trees." Sturm saw Tanis's look of concern. "What's the matter?" "The old one says someone's following us." "Bah!" Gilfanas threw down his last bit of quith pa in disgust and stood up. "That's insane. Let us go now.
Yeah, it's a dab rig.
Still many miles.
Well,
We must
it's a
get to
dab
some-
rig, and you can smoke
I'll take me.
flour out of it.
Sturm said to Tanis, softly.
It has a whole
They walked through the ragged pines for several more hours.
it has a whole
The sun
different
slanted
bucket for
down
the flour.
sky, lengthening shadows across the trail. When the group came suddenly to a clearing, Tanis warned, falling back in alarm. Caraman, instantly alert, drew his sword, motioning for Sturm and his brother with his free hand. "What is it?"
Yeah, because the price tag
Tanis glared
on
at
their
him,
website,
and Tas clapped his own hand over his
Excuse
own
me.
mouth to save Tanis.
on their website, and
The clearing was the site
And,
of
like,
a
the
recent blood
smoke
fight.
shops and whatnot.
Bodies of
The
men
price
and
tag on it
goblins
is
lay
like
scattered about in the obscene
$374
costumes of
before
brutes.
taxes,
The companions
and I
looked
got
about
it for
and
a
listened
$10
for
raffle
minutes, but
ticket.
could hear nothing above the roar of the water.
What can I say? I have good luck once in a while.
Sturm glared at Gilfanas and started to step out into the clearing. "Wait," Tanis said.
I thought I saw something move. Maybe one of them's still alive.
Sturm said coolly and walked forward. The rest followed more slowly. A low, moaning sound came from beneath two hobgoblin bodies. The warriors walked toward
But
the
it was a
carnage,
local
sword
smoke
in
shop. It's called Cloud 9. But they're at the tattoo convention last weekend.
beneath was a moaning figure. Human. Caramel
And
And covered with blood. Unconscious, I think.
yeah, they had a
the
booth
rest
set
came
up
to
and
look at the man on
they're
the ground.
raffling off a couple
Gold Moon
pieces.
started to kneel down,
If you
but
purchase
Caramel
something,
stopped her.
you
No,
went in for a raffle
he
for
said gently.
like a
It would be
water bomb.
senseless to heal him if we just have to kill him.
Or you could buy
Humans fought for the
a
dragon
$10
island
ticket
themselves.
like what I did
The group
and get
gathered
entered to
round
win
to examine
that.
the man. He wore
Or
chain
should I
mail
say
that was
this?
of good quality, if rather
Oh.
tarnished. His clothes were rich, though the cloth had worn thin in places.
And
He appeared to be in his
I
late
bought it on the
His
first
hair
day
was thick and black, his chin firm,
just
and
to
his features.
support them and just to
The stranger opened his eyes and stared
try
at
my
his
chances.
companions, blearing.
Thank the gods of the Seekers.
And
He said,
on the
hoarsely.
last day of the drawing, and
Friends,
I get a phone call. Me and my brother most
"Worry about
hated
yourself first,"
are here
Stern said sternly.
at the house, and
"Tell
we
us
got
who
a phone
your
call
friends
and
were, the humans or the hobgoblins.
saying that I won.
the humans. Fighters
Oh shit!
against the
Hell
dragon.
yeah! So congratulations on that.
Broke off. His eyes wide.
About time.
Eben,
Gilthenhouse said in quiet surprise.
how did you survive the battle at the ravine? How did
You know what's cool is I could switch the light.
The man named Eben tried to stagger to his feet. Caraman reached out a hand to help him when suddenly Eben pointed.
Look out! Drake!
Caraman whipped around, letting Eben fall back with a groan. The others turned to see 12 Draconians standing at the edge of the clearing, weapons drawn.
All strangers in the land are to be taken to the Dragon High Lord for questioning.
One called out.
We charge you to come with us peacefully.
No one was supposed to know about this path to slay Mori. Sturm whispered to Tanis, with a meaningful glance at Gilthenhouse. According to the elf, that is. We do not take orders from Lord Verminard, Tanis yelled, ignoring Sturm.
You will soon enough.
The Draconian said and waved its arm. The
Yeah, it
creature
has,
surged forward to attack.
25 different temp
Standing near
settings.
the edge of the woods, pulled something from
You
his
could
pouch and
actually
began to
have it
mumble
set
a few
to
words. Not fireball.
your draw time
Jason
for when you're
whispered,
hitting it
grabbing
to
the
keep
old
at
mage's
that
arm.
same
We'll
temperature
incinerate everyone out there.
instead of heating it, then
Oh,
burning it off,
okay.
but keeping it at it.
I suppose you're right.
Yeah, you can do your draw
The old
time,
mage
temp
sighed in
settings,
disappointment. Then
change the
growled,
lights.
Wait. I'll think of something else.
Just stay here, under cover, Raceland ordered. I'm going to my brother.
No. What was
One
that
more.
web spell?
The old man pondered. Tika, her new sword drawn and ready, trembled with fear and excitement. One Draconian rushed her, and she swung a tremendous blow. The blade missed the Draconian by a mile. Caraman's head by inches. Pulling Tika behind her, he knocked the Draconian down with the flat of his sword. Before it could rise, he stepped on its throat, breaking its neck. Get behind me, he said to Tika, then glanced down at the sword she was still waving around wildly. On second thought, Caraman amended nervously. Run over to those trees with the old man and Gold Moon. There's a good girl. I will not, Tika said indignantly. I'll show him, she muttered, her sweaty palms slipping on the hilt of the sword. Two more Draconians charged Caraman, but his brother was beside him now, the two combining magic and steel to destroy their enemy. Tika knew she would only get in their way, and she feared Raceland's anger more than she feared Draconians.
She looked around to see if anyone needed her help.
Right. Definitely gives
Stern
good
and
hits.
Travis fought side by side.
Which means the way it
Made
hits,
an unlikely teeth
it's
flip.
gonna make my
His hoop planted solidly in
my
the
wax go by
ground, sent a deadly barrage of
or should I
rocks
say I'm gonna go through my wax a lot quicker.
The old moon stood beneath the trees. Riverwood near. The old magician had pulled out a spell book and was flipping through its pages. Web. How did that go? He mumbled. Ah! A screech behind Tika nearly caused her to swallow her tongue. Whirling around, she dropped her sword in alarm as a draconian, laughing horribly, launched itself into the air straight at her. Panic-stricken, Tika gripped her shield in both hands and struck the draconian in its hideous, reptilian face. The impact nearly jarred the shield from her hands, but it knocked the creature onto its back, unconscious. Tika picked up her sword and, grimacing in disgust, stabbed the creature through the heart. Its body immediately turned to stone, encasing her sword. Tika yanked at it, but it remained stuck fast. "Tika, to your left!" yelled Tasselhoff shrilly. Tika stumbled around and saw another draconian. Swinging her shield, she blocked its sword thrust. Then, with a strength born of terror, she hit at the creature again and again with her shield, knowing only that she had to kill the thing. She kept rushing until
not
she
much, just
on her arm. Whipping
chilled.
her blood
My brother,
ready, she saw
most hated grower, actually ordered some food out so we could have something to eat. But that's about it.
It's all over, Tika. They're all dead.
Nothing too special.
Just fine. Tika blinked. For a moment, she didn't recognize the body. Then, with a shudder, she lowered her shield. I wasn't very good with the sword, she said, starting to tremble in reaction to her fear and the memory of the horrible creature lunging.
There we go. It's still on, but I turned the light off just because it saves on the battery.
Red curls. You were braver than many men I've seen. Experienced warriors. The big man said with deep voice. Tika looked up into Karen's eyes. Her terror melted away, replaced by exultation. She pressed against Karen. The feel of his hard muscle, the smell of sweat, mingled with leather, increased her excitement. Tika flung her arms around his neck and kissed him with such violence, her teeth bit into his lip. She tasted blood in her mouth. Karen, astonished, felt the tingle of pain, an odd contrast to the softness of her lips, and was overwhelmed with desire. He wanted this woman more than any other woman, and there had been many in his life. He forgot where he was, who was around him. His brain and blood were on fire, and he ached with the pain of his passion. Crushing Tika to his chest, he held her and kissed her with bruising intensity. The pain of his embrace was delicious to Tika. She longed for the pain to grow and envelop her, but at the same time she felt suddenly cold and afraid. Remembering stories told by the other barmaids of the terrible, wonderful things that happened between men and women, she began to panic. Karen completely lost all sense of reality. He caught Tika up in his arms, with a wild idea of carrying her into the woods, when he felt a cold, familiar hand on his shoulder. The big man stared at his brother and regained his senses with a gasp. He gently set Tika on her feet. Dizzy and disoriented, she opened her eyes to see Raceland standing beside his brother, regarding her with his strange, glittering stare. Tika's face burned. She backed away, stumbled over the body of the Draconian, then picked up her shield and ran. Karaman swallowed, cleared his throat, and started to say something, but
Raceland simply glanced at him in disgust and walked back to rejoin Fizban. Karen, trembling like a newborn colt, sighed, shaken, and walked over to where Stern, Tanis, and Gilfanas stood, talking to Eben. "No, I'm fine," the man assured me. "I just felt a little faint when I saw those creatures, that's all." "You really have a cleric among you? That's wonderful. Don't waste your healing powers on me."
I guess it wasn't too bad of a birthday.
More their blood than mine.
Had smoke, had some good food.
These Draconians through the woods when we were attacked by at least 40 hobgoblins. And you alone,
I guess I can't complain too much.
Gilfanas said. "Yes," Eben replied, returning the elf's suspicious gaze. "I am an expert swordsman, as you know. I killed these." He gestured to the bodies of 6 hobgoblins who lay around him, then fell to the overwhelming numbers. The rest must have assumed I was dead and left me. But enough of my heroics. You fellows are pretty good with swords yourselves. Where are you headed?" "Someplace called the Slate," began Karen, but Gilfanas cut him off. "Our journey is secret," Gilfanas said. Then he added in a tentative voice, "We could use an expert swordsman."
Hell yeah, you're right on that.
"As long as you're fighting
so,
Draconians, you're fighting
yeah.
my fight,"
Definitely appreciate
Evan
it.
said cheerfully. He pulled his pack out from under the body of a hobgoblin and slung
As
it
I
over
said, I
his
can't
shoulder.
complain too much. I'm
"My name's
still
Evan
alive.
Shatterstone. I come from Gateway. You've probably heard of my family," he said. "We had one of the most impressive mansions west of—" "That's it!" cried Fizban. "I remembered." Suddenly, the air was filled with strands of sticky, floating cobweb. The sun set just as the group reached an open plain edged by tall mountain peaks. Rivaling the mountains for dominance of the land before it was the gigantic fortress known as Pax Tharkas, which guarded the pass between the mountains. The companions stared at it in awed silence. Tika's eyes widened at the sight of the massive twin towers soaring into the sky. "I've never seen anything so big. Who built it? They must have been powerful men." "It was not men," said Flint sadly. The dwarf's beard quivered as he looked at Pax Tharkas with a wistful expression. "It was elves and dwarves working together. Once, long ago, when times were peaceful." "The dwarf speaks truly," Gilfanas said. "Long ago, Kith Cannon broke his father's heart and left the ancient home of Sylvanest. He and his people came to the beautiful woods given them by the Emperor of Airgolf, following the scribing of the sword sheath scroll that ended the Kinslayer Wars. Elves have lived in Qualanesti for long centuries since Kith Canaan's death. His greatest achievement, however, was the building of Pax Tharkas. Standing between elven and dwarven kingdoms, it was constructed by both in a spirit of friendship since lost on Kryn. It grieves me to see it now, the bastion of a mighty war machine." Even as Gilfanas spoke, the companions saw the huge gate that stood at the front of Pax Tharkas swing open. An army, long rows of Draconians, hobgoblins and goblins, marched out into the plains. The sound of braying horns echoed back from the mountaintops. Watching them from above was a great red dragon. The companions cowered among the scrub brush and trees. Though the dragon was too far away to see them, the dragon fear touched them, even from this distance. "They march on Qualanesti," Gilfanas said, his voice breaking. "We must get inside and free the prisoners. Then Verminard will be forced to call the army back." "You're going inside Pax Tharkas?" Eben gasped. "Yes," Gilfanas answered reluctantly, apparently regretting he had said so much. "Whoo!" Eben blew out a deep breath.
You people have guts. I'll give you that. So, how do we get in there? Wait until the army leaves? There will probably be only a couple of guards at the front gate. We could handle them easily, couldn't we, big man? He nudged Caravan. Sure. Caravan grinned. That is not the plan, Gilthanas said coldly. The elf pointed to a narrow vale leading into the mountains, just visible in the rapidly fading light. There is our way. We will cross in the cover of darkness. He stood up and started off. Tanis hurried forward to catch up with him. What do you know of this, Evan? The half-elf asked in Elven, glancing back to where the man was chatting with Tika. Gilthanas shrugged. He was with the band of humans who fought with us at the ravine. Those who survived were taken to Solace and died there. I suppose he could have escaped. I did, after all. Gilthanas said, glancing sideways at Tanis. He comes from Gateway, where his father and father before him were wealthy merchants. The others told me when he was out of hearing that his family lost their money, and he has since earned his living by his sword. I figured as much, Tanis said. His clothes are rich, but they've seen better days. You made the right decision bringing him along. I dared not leave him behind, Gilthanas answered grimly. One of us should keep an eye on him. Yes. Tanis fell silent. And on me too, you're thinking? Gilthanas said in a tight voice. I know what the others say, the knight especially. But I swear to you, Tanis, I'm not a traitor. I want one thing. The elf's eyes gleamed feverishly in the dying light. I want to destroy this Verminard. If you could have seen him as his dragon destroyed my people, I'd gladly sacrifice my life. Gilthanas stopped abruptly. And our lives as well, Tanis asked. As Gilthanas turned to face him, his almond-shaped eyes regarding Tanis without emotion. If you must know, Tanis, your life means that. He snapped his fingers. But the lives of my people are everything to me. This is all I care for now. He walked on ahead as Sturm caught up with them. Tanis, he said. The old man was right. We are being followed. Chapter 9. Suspicions grow. The Slarmori. The narrow trail climbed steeply up from the plains into a wooded valley in the foothills. Evening's shadows gathered close around them as they followed the stream up into the mountain. They had traveled only a short distance, however, when Gilthanas left the trail and disappeared into the brush. The companions stopped, looking at each other doubtfully. This is madness, Eben whispered to Tanis. Trolls live in this valley. Who do you think made that trail? The dark-haired man took Tanis's arm with a cool familiarity. The half-elf found disconcerting. Admittedly, I'm the new kid in town, so to speak. And the gods know you don't have any reason to trust me, but how much do you know about this Gilthanas? I know, Tanis began, but Eben ignored him. There were some of us who didn't believe that Draconian army stumbled onto us by accident. If you take my meaning. My boys and I have been hiding in the hills, fighting the dragon armies ever since they hit Gateway. Last week, these elves showed up out of nowhere. They told us they were going to raid one of the Dragon High Lord's fortresses, and would we like to come along and help? We said, sure, why not? Anything to stick a bone in the Dragon High man's craw. As we hiked, we began to get really nervous. There were Draconian tracks all over the place, but it didn't bother the elves. Gilthanas said the tracks were old. That night we made camp and posted a watch. It didn't do us a lot of good, just gave us about 20 seconds warning before the Draconians hit, and
Eben glanced around and moved even closer. While we were trying to wake up, grab our weapons, and fight those foul creatures, I heard the elves calling out as if someone was lost. And who do you suppose they were calling for? Eben regarded Tanis intently. The half-elf frowned and shook his head, irritated at the dramatics. Gilthanas! Eben hissed. He was gone! They shouted and shouted for him, their leader. The man shrugged. Whether he ever showed up or not, I don't know. I was captured. They took us to Solace where I got away. Anyway, I'd think twice about following that elf. He may have had a good reason to be gone when the Draconians attacked. I've known Gilthanas a long time. Tanis interrupted, gruffly, more disturbed than he wanted to admit. Sure. Just thought you should know. Eben said, smiling sympathetically. He clapped Tanis on the back and dropped back to stand by Tika. Tanis didn't have to look around to know Caramin and Sturm had heard every word. Neither said anything, however. And before Tanis could talk to them, Gilthanas appeared suddenly, slipping out from among the trees. It's not that much farther, the elf said. The brush thins up ahead, and the walking is easier. I say we just go in the front gate, Eben said. I agree, Caramin said. The big man glanced at his brother, who sat limply beneath a tree. Goldmoon was pale with fatigue. Even Tasselhoff's head hung wearily. We could camp here tonight and go in by the front gates at dawn, Sturm suggested. We stick to the original plan, Tanis said sharply. We make camp once we reach the Slaamori. Then Flint spoke up. You can go ring the bell at the gate and ask Lord Verminard to let you in if you want, Sturm Brightblade. I'm sure he'd oblige. Come on, Tanis. The dwarf stomped off down the trail. At least, Tanis said to Sturm in a low voice.
The dog's over here snoring.
Throw off our pursuer. Whoever or whatever it is, Sturm answered. It's woodscrafty, I'll say that for it. Every time I caught a glimpse and started back for a closer look, it vanished. I thought about ambushing it, but there wasn't time. The group emerged from the brush, thankfully, arriving at the base of a gigantic granite cliff. Gilthanas walked along the cliff face for several hundred feet, his hand feeling for something on the rock. Suddenly, he stopped. Yeah, here, he whispered. Reaching into his hand, he removed a small gem that began to glow a soft, muted yellow. Running his hand over the rock wall, the elf found what he was searching for, a small niche in the granite. He placed the gem in the niche and began reciting ancient words and tracing unseen symbols in the night air.
Very impressive,
whispered Fizban.
I didn't know he was one of us,
he said to Raceland.
a dabbler, nothing more.
The mage replied. Leaning wearily on his staff, he watched Gilthanas intently, however. Suddenly and silently, the huge block of stone separated from the cliff face and began moving slowly to one side. The companions backed up as a blast of chill, dank air flowed from the gaping hole in the rock. What's in there? Caramin asked suspiciously. I do not know what is in there now, Gilthanas replied. I have never entered. I know of this place only through the lore of my people. All right, Caramin growled. What used to be in there? Gilthanas paused, then said, this was the burial chamber of Kithcadden. More spooks, Flint grumbled, peering into the darkness. Send the mage in first so he can warn them we're coming. Throw the dwarf in, Raceland returned. They are accustomed to living in dark, dank caves. You speak of the mountain dwarves, Flint said, his beard bristling. It has been long years since the hill dwarves lived below ground in the kingdom of Thorgarden.
Only because you were cast out.
Raceland hissed. Stop it, both of you, Tanis said in exasperation. Raceland, what do you sense about this place?
Evil. Great evil,
The mage replied.
But I sense great goodness, too.
Fizban spoke unexpectedly.
The elves are not truly forgotten within, though evil things have come to rule in their stead.
This is crazy, Eben shouted. The noise echoed uncannily among the rocks, and the others whirled, startled, staring at him in alarm.
Sorry,
He said, dropping his voice, but I can't believe you people are going in there. It doesn't take a magician to tell there's evil inside that hole. I can feel it. Go back around to the front, he urged. Sure, there'll be 1 or 2 guards, but that's nothing compared to whatever lurks in that darkness beyond. He's got a point, Tanis, Caravan said.
we can't fight the dead. We learned that in Darken Wood.
This is the only way, Gilthanas said angrily. If you are such cowards, there's a difference between caution and cowardice, Gilthanas, Tanis said, his voice steady and calm. The half-elf thought a moment. We might be able to take on the guards at the front gate, but not before they could alert others. I say we enter and at least explore this way. Flint, you lead. Raceland will need your light.
Shirak,
Spoke the mage softly, and the crystal on his staff began to glow. He and Flint plunged into the cave, followed closely by the rest. The tunnel they entered was obviously ancient, but whether it was natural or artifact was impossible to tell. What about our pursuer? Sturm asked in a low voice. Do we leave the entrance open? A trap. Tanis agreed softly. Leave it open just a crack, Gilthanas. Enough so that whoever's tracking us knows we came in here and can follow. But not enough so that it looks like a trap. Gilthanas drew forth the gem, placed it in a niche on the inner side of the entrance, and spoke a few words. The stone began to slide silently back into place. At the last moment, it was about 7 or 8 inches from closing. Gilthanas swiftly removed the gemstone. The stone shuddered to a halt, and the knight, the elf, and the half-elf joined the companions in the entrance to the Sla Mor.
there is a great deal of dust.
Raceland reported, coughing.
But no tracks, at least in this part of the cave.
About 120 feet farther on, there's a crossroads.
Flint added.
We found footprints there, but we could not make out what they were. They don't look like Draconians or hobgoblins, and they don't come this direction. The mage says the evil flows from the road to the right.
Camp here for the night. Near the entrance. We'll post double watch, one by the door, one down the corridor. Stern, you and Caraman first. Gilthanas and I, Eben and Riverwind, Flint and Tassel. And me, said Tika stoutly, though she couldn't ever remember being so tired in her life. I'll take my turn. Tanis was glad that darkness hid his smile. Very well, he said. You watch with Flint and Tasselhoff. Good, Tika replied. Opening her pack, she took out a blanket and lay down, conscious all the while of Caraman's eyes on her. She noticed Eben watching her too. She didn't mind that. She was accustomed to men staring at her admiringly, and Eben was handsomer even than Caraman. Certainly he was wittier and more charming than the big warrior. Still, just the memory of Caraman's arms around her made her shiver with delightful fear. She firmly put the memory from her mind and tried to get comfortable. The chain mail was cold and it pinched her through her blouse, yet she noticed the others didn't take theirs off. Besides,
She was tired enough to sleep dressed in a full suit of plate armor. The last thing Tika remembered as she drifted off was telling herself she was thankful she wasn't alone with Caraman. Gold Moon saw the warrior's eyes linger on Tika, whispering something to Riverwind, who nodded, smiling. She left him and walked over to Caraman. Touching him on the arm, she drew him away from the others into the shadow of the corridor. Tanis tells me you have an older sister, she stated.
Yes,
Caraman answered, startled.
Kichara, though she's my half-sister.
Gold Moon smiled and laid her hand gently on Caraman's arm. I'm going to talk to you like an older sister. Caraman grinned.
Not like Kichara, you wouldn't, Lady of Quayshu.
Kit taught me the meaning of every swear word I'd ever heard, plus a few I hadn't. She taught me to use a sword and fight with honor in the tournaments. She also taught me how to kick a man in the groin when the judges weren't watching. No, lady, you're not much like my older sister. Gold Moon's eyes opened wide, startled by this portrayal of a woman she guessed the half-elf loved.
All right, everyone. Excuse me. Yeah, I caught into this live for tonight. But I want to thank everyone for stopping by and everyone who continues to stop by. I definitely appreciate all y'all support. Till next time, everyone. Y'all stay safe out there.